Hello, folks. Welcome to an Ask Me Anything. I haven't really prepared for this because I've been busy doing things, but it doesn't really matter because you're going to ask me questions anyway. I would kind of advise you not to completely fill up the sidebar with kind of random chitter-chatter because it's harder for me to find the actual questions if I'm having to scroll through all the other stuff. Not that I'm saying you can't be sociable, but you know what I mean. It's just I'm here on my own. I've got to find the questions. So I have a couple of questions to kick things off. Willie Robertson asked me, what did I think of Peaky Blinders, The Immortal Man? So other than the fact they copied my idea for a hat, but I don't think they did. I've enjoyed Peaky Blinders since the beginning. I think the first series was a bit of a slow burn for me, but once Tom Hardy joined in, Alfie Solomons and all that kind of stuff, I loved it more. But the film, there's been a bit of a gap since season 6 or series 6. And I saw the film on Netflix with Mag about a week ago, and yeah, I liked it. I don't think it reached the high heights of the series, but I'm kind of glad it kind of rounded things off, ready for the sequel series set in the 50s with what's his face from Billy Elliot, Jamie, what's his name? Anyway, obviously, if you know your World War II stuff. There was some inaccuracies in terms of the weapons. So spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the Peaky Blinders film, I may possibly give away some plot points, but they have Sten Mark IIs, and the Sten Mark IIs, well, no, even Sten Mark I's weren't around in 1940. It's 41, 42 before they start appearing. And they also had MG42s, which of course, the clue is in the name 42, don't come out till 42. It would have been better to have MG34s. I also think that the scenes of bombed out Birmingham kind of looked, I don't know how to word it really, overly dramatic, but at the same time, I'm glad that they acknowledged that Birmingham was one of the cities that was hit a lot. So I don't know, I feel that the set decoration, the art direction, it looked a bit sort of like industrial wasteland, almost like one of those kind of post-nuclear apocalypse type films. But overall, I thought it was pretty damn good. I say not quite the heights of the TV show, but you know, what the hell. I liked it. So there we are. That's the first one. Peaky Blinders, what did I think? Another question from Scott Grimwood, and Scott asked, hi, Woody, here is a question. Do you know how many official temporary military cemeteries there were in Normandy after June the 6th, 1944? So I think the key word in your question there, Scott, is official, because there would have been places of burial that weren't officially classified as a temporary cemetery, and it would have been different between British forces, Canadian forces, and US forces. From recollection, there were 24 official temporary cemeteries in France for US forces, of which there are now 6 permanent ones left in France. So they reduced it by 3/4. But that doesn't mean that there weren't little areas where people were buried very temporarily, even maybe for 24 hours, 48 hours, that weren't officially a temporary cemetery. For British Canadian Duke forces, I wouldn't even like to hazard a guess at the figure, because if you know anything about how the British and Duke forces honored their dead, there was this tradition of burying people really where they fell, which does extend to the US as well, but there was slightly more of a culture of regrouping to US casualties into larger, and by larger cemeteries, it could just be, a couple of dozen graves. But I would imagine if you take a battle like Tilly-sur-Seulles or Longève, I would imagine in that kind of battlefield, which goes up towards Pierre-Saint-Paul and Hill 103, I would imagine in that area, you'd have probably had a couple of dozen temporary sites of burials. I wouldn't be surprised if for the British and Canadian forces, there were possibly as many as hundreds of temporary cemeteries. But as I said, when Scott said official, I don't know how you would quantify the word official in that. But suffice it to say, there were lots of places, and now there are the permanent cemeteries. So Normandy has in total, I think is it 19 cemeteries? I forget how many it is now. Of which some there were 6 German. There were 2 American ones, one at Omaha Beach and the one at St. James down near Mont Saint Michel, and the rest are British and Canadian. So that's the question. Answers to that one. Some random questions, not just World War II. Do I consider Blondie a punk band or just a band riding the punk genre to the pop charts? I mean, they have their origins in punk. They come out of that kind of New York Dolls scene. But some of the musicians in Blondie had picked up some of the stuff from the UK scene as well. I mean, punk is an attitude. I think punk is more of an attitude than it is a strict genre of music. And if you're only interested in World War II, I'm going to go talk about punk music now. I am now regretting that I'm not going to be in London tomorrow for the Damned 50th anniversary concert. It just didn't work out. I saw them in Paris in February, but yeah, the Damned really only did a couple of genuine sort of punk albums, and the rest of their stuff could be described as goth rock or even kind of pop. But Blondie definitely touched into the punk spirit, I think. So there we are. That's that one. We won't do music for a bit, although I enjoy doing that. Andreas and Jim. So Andreas asked me, have I seen the film Nuremberg? And Jim said, have you seen the film Nuremberg? So yes, I have seen the film Nuremberg. And I have to say, I was pleasantly surprised. I think I've become a little bit cynical to some ways about modern war films. You know, they take lots of liberties. The casting can be a bit iffy and things like that. But I was pleasantly surprised. I thought Russell Crowe was excellent, and Rami Malek didn't annoy me too much. I think he's a very good actor, but I think his presence can get a little can go a long way, if that doesn't sound tough. But I thought he was very good. The character of the translator, I forget the name of the actor and I forget the name of the character, but the real person, he is coming up on, well, not he is, his biographer, Helen Fry, who some of you know from the channel. She has just done her latest book about the Nuremberg translator, and that will be in May, I think. I forget which date that was. But so we're going to be talking about his real life story. And the veteran only passed away a couple of years ago. I feel he died in pre-production of the film. So I believe he knew it was going to be made, something like that. So, I mean, obviously, if you're being really critical of the movie, it has to take some liberties and condensing characters, and there were several psychiatrists, there were several doctors, there were several guard commanders who were kind of amalgamated into one or two characters. But I think it captured the basic principle of Nuremberg and how they had to essentially create a set of laws for those trials, which they didn't fully create, in that they're still amending those laws, even when they were trying Klaus Barbie in the 1980s in France. They were still amending in terms of the wars against humanity, that kind of stuff. So it was a process that began with in fact, it began with some of the trials that happened before Nuremberg. There were a couple of smaller trials in Norway and the Soviet Union, things like that. And then basically the world realized they needed to have a set of legal laws. Laws is the word to accommodate the type of crimes that are being done there. But I liked it, and it wasn't too long. I think there's a habit these days with a lot of films going straight to streaming, that directors don't feel the need to keep movies to sort of under 2 hours, so you can have like 6 showings a day in a cinema, that kind of thing. And they can be a bit, you know, I know Lawrence of Arabia and some films like that were very long back in the day, but it's a masterpiece. But I think too many films outstay their welcome a little bit with me these days, and I thought Nuremberg was refreshingly not too long. So yeah, I liked it, and I hope, like with Band of Brothers, like with Masters of the Air, it might kickstart a bit more of an interest in the war crimes. Perhaps we'll have something about the Tokyo trials. Perhaps there'll be something about, you know, Klaus Barbie or the Joachim Pipe. I don't know. So yeah, I liked it. So let's go. Let's do some more questions. Where is this one here? I saw one from David. Can we have Sal on from what's going on with shipping? Yes, Sal's very busy. We'll talk a little bit in a minute about how this year is panning out for me. And we have talked, and he will be doing something. I just don't know when it'll be exactly. And he's obviously riding high on his own channel. So that's really good. I'm just going to have a sip of my beer. And I'm drinking, it's weird because it looks invisible because of the green screen behind me. Now, I call it Greeny King. A lot of people say Green King, but my family who are from Suffolk, which is where the Greeny King brewery is from, say Greeny. So you can say green, I can say greeny. It's an IPA. I bought back 12 bottles of British beer and some cans on my last trip. And so I'm drinking a Greeny King. So I'll have a sip of that. And cheers. If you haven't joined in the drinking, if you're in the USA, it's early in the afternoon. If you're in the UK, feel free to have a drink. If you're in Australia, it's crazy o'clock in the morning. So perhaps not have a drink if you're working in a few hours' time. But I don't care. Do what you want. It's you're all adults, I think. I'm gonna have a sip of beer. So there we go. That's that one. Gareth, I had one of your beers, Gareth, that you bought me over. Gareth kindly brought me over some lovely Welsh beer. I was with Gareth Saturday night. Was it Saturday night? And he brought me over some Welsh beer on his motorbike, which is very much appreciated. Gower Gold. I had one of them. I have one of them another time. So he's asking me, what would I have if I could have a superpower? Well, actually, I have a standard answer to that, which I thought about for a long time. And you might think, some of you watching, oh, that's a bit of a boring response, but I think it would be the best power to have. So if I could have a superpower, it would be to speak every language on the planet, or at least all the big ones. I don't know that I'd need some of the remote ones for some of the, the lost tribes in South America. But if I could speak, Spanish, Russian, German, Swahili, Urdu, those kind of things, the amount of extra insight you could have when you speak to people would be amazing. So, yeah, perhaps not the most exciting superpower. And I know people, particularly some of my European friends, who routinely speak 3 or 4 languages, and some of them speak 5 or 6, and some of them are multilingual and speak, up to 10 languages. Us Brits, we struggle with 1, and then we kind of maybe pretend we can do a 2nd or 3rd. So that would be my superpower, speaking lots and lots of languages. That was an easy question to answer. Thank you, Gareth. What do we got next? Gordy says, have we covered the Bamber Bridge incident? No, we haven't, but I do have a historian in mind, and when her book came out on the subject a couple of years ago, we were going to do something about it, and we didn't. And at some point, when I do a little series about, I don't know, let's call it racially aggravated incidents in World War II, grouping them together, I will contact her again and I will try and arrange something. And as that came up, I will talk a little bit about this year and the programming. So not to talk all about me and what's going on in my life, but last year was a bit crappy in some ways. My mum died this time last year. Mag had breast cancer, which she has recovered from, but it's there in the back of my mind all the time. My best mate, Colin Taylor. Cheers, Colin. Have a drink to Colin. Passed away in September, and there are all sorts of issues with my dad. My dad is not doing terribly well. So this year, I had kind of hoped to do more of my kind of thematic weeks where I do a week of resistance stuff or a week of whatever it would be. It's going to be more scattergun this year, as I just I won't be having to move things around. I've already had to move things around. I will have to shuffle things around. It's not a bad thing because it means that every week there's a sort of variety of subjects. So I'm going to be not pushing it quite so much this year. If I need to go back to the UK, and I will try and make more trips back to the UK this year. Well, not I will try, I will be. So the theme weeks kind of won't necessarily be coming at you this year, but there will be lots of content, but maybe slightly less than normal. But it just gives you a chance to catch up, some of you, because we've got a ridiculous amount of content on the channel. King of Battle Book, do you have any bucket list items related to World War II that you've yet to complete? I mean, yeah, you could take that. It's a great question. You could take that in so many different ways. I think I'm going to answer it in a roundabout way. I think a few years ago, I maybe thought I would get to a point where I could sort of self-identify as an expert in a couple of fields. You know, I mean, I feel I'm quite good on Normandy. I feel I'm quite good on British Army uniforms, things like that. But I've since realized that there's no need to try and set yourself a goal. So I don't feel the need to complete things anymore. I just see it as a big, huge adventure of learning. I don't think that, you know, oh, I must try and learn this by the end of this year. I must make sure I get fully to grips with Operation Compass in the North African desert, that kind of thing. So I don't know that I have any sort of bucket list things in that sense. I kind of, this is going to sound really pretentious, and I don't mean it to, and apologies in advance. I kind of feel I would like someone at some point to just kind of recognize not just what someone like I am doing personally, but what other YouTubers are doing to put World War II content out there. You know, I'm not saying I deserve the World War II broadcasting equivalent of an Oscar, but I do think that this resource that people like myself and Dan Hill and JD and World War II Wayfind, all these other great people there, I think some sort of recognition, because the proper TV industry, they give themselves awards all the time, don't they? And there are podcast awards where people have been given awards for running a series of 10 podcasts. And I'm not saying they're bad podcasts, but people like me who are on a much lower shelf, I feel that we go for a long time without necessarily people realizing how much effort goes into this. And maybe we're not getting the millions of views, but we're putting this content out there. I think we're collectively, not individually, people like Sal, what's going on with shipping, another one worth mentioning. There's so many great channels out there, is that we are providing something that regular TV just isn't doing properly. Back in the day, we were getting really good, and you have to slow down with comments. I'm now seeing I've got something like 90 comments that are unread. So just hold your horses a little bit with the comments. Otherwise, I'll never get to half of them. Just 10 minutes of breather, folks, and then we can come back to them. You know, I think we're pushing the envelope. We're doing content. We're doing subjects that mainstream TV wouldn't do. So I kind of feel that every now and then, if I've got some sort of aspiration or ambition, it would be to randomly someone, you know, send me an email or something saying you've been nominated. I know it sounds really pretentious, but someone just saying that we recognize what you people are doing and you're helping, and you know, something from a university or school or an organization. But that's it. It sounds pretentious. I'm going to stop talking about that now. What are the dream guests and topics? King of Battle Book again. So some dream guests. I mean, some of the guests I would like to have had are the ones that have passed away. To go back and drill down in some of the people that I don't necessarily agree with everything they said. People like John Keegan back in the day, and I'd like to have spoken to. Carlo Deste, who has passed. I don't agree with everything they say, but I would like to speak to him. I'd love to speak to Tom Hanks. He's high on my list. And I have another person, and I have messaged numerous times and never had a response. And it's Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker, because I would like him to come on and talk about the Big Red One film he made with Lee Marvin. And I feel that if he ever saw this and ever saw me, he'd appreciate not just talking about Star Wars. I know he's done his, voice of Joker in Batman series, things like that. But Robert Carradine, who was also in Big Red One, died a couple of weeks ago. I contacted his agent a couple of years ago about whether he'd do an interview, and his agent said he's not doing interviews at this time. So that hasn't happened. But Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker, to talk about the Big Red One, the Sam Fuller film. Beyond that, Ben McIntyre, I suppose. Ben McIntyre's wrote Double Cross and the film about Eddie Chapman, things like that. He goes on bigger podcasts than mine, but I've managed to not receive a reply from contacting his agent. So that would be cool. I think he does some good work. So that's a few there for you. Best heroic story of D-Day and after. I mean, good grief. This is a kind of a staple response to these kind of questions. The most heroic story in any campaign is the one I've just read or the one I've just heard about on the channel. He constantly reminded of how brave people are, and measuring bravery and comparing bravery and heroism is very complicated. The show we did about Sigrid Schultz a couple of days ago, the journalist, how brave she was to be reporting from the Third Reich in the 1930s, indeed up until 1941. So, anybody who faces an enemy in combat to some extent is doing something heroic, although I do not completely believe that it's appropriate to say everybody who served in World War II was a hero, because there are people who didn't perform very well. There are people who shirked their duties. There are people who got arrested for and some of them were mentally incapacitated. But I think it's a blanket statement saying everybody is hero. I have slight problems with that, in that it doesn't allow for the variation of human responses to something as terrible as World War II. So, yeah, I mean, what recently in terms of D-Day, what have I been talking about recently? What am I thinking about recently? I don't know. Some of the British infantry brigades and the Canadian infantry brigades that don't get as much attention as perhaps the commandos, the paratroops, those kind of things. Some of those just regular, the 50th Division, if Terry Down is in the audience, who'd been slogging it against the Germans for 2 or 3 years by this point. So, just the poor bloody infantry, PBI. I think they always underappreciated. So yeah, that's some of them. This is about whether or not I ought to join the services. When I was 16 and I left school, I did go and speak to the army recruiter about the possibility of going into the army. I didn't tell my mum and dad I was doing it. I had aspirations to follow my great uncle into the infantry. The Royal Ulster Rifles that he served in didn't exist as a separate unit back then, and I would have had trouble getting into an Irish regiment or a Northern Irish regiment from Essex. Long story short, I kind of talked myself out of it because I don't think I was quite, the right person, and also my eyes. I was long-sighted back then, and they gave me the basic eye test, or I took in with me my prescription or something. I forget how I worked it out now. And they said, you would not be able to be in infantry. You would have to be in engineers or artillery or something like that. And that didn't sound as appealing. And basically the idea didn't last very long. But I think if I had been in, I think I'd have liked to have been infantry. But who knows? I don't know. That was 40 years ago. So who knows? More questions. Another one from King of Battle book. Do I think there's room in historiography for any more books on World War II? Absolutely. It's a frequent subject that comes up with people who don't know perhaps exactly what I do. Me and Gary from Northern Ireland, he was over on Wednesday evening. I went to the pub. I do go to the pub quite often. I'm trying to go more often this year because I miss going out with Colin anyway. We bumped into a couple of Americans and I was describing what I was doing, and one of them said, surely everything's been said with regards to World War II. And I'm like, well, no, absolutely not. And even some of the subjects that have been covered a lot, there are different angles to come at it from. There is new information, there's new analysis, there's fresh interpretation. There's, Michael Ackerman is a fantastic example of how he has pushed the envelope with his work on Omaha Beach. And there are other specialists who've been on my channel who have been researching one particular unit or one particular campaign and taking things to beyond where a previous generation of historians could have thought it possible to go. So I think there's unlimited opportunities to talk about World War II. I think, though, it will have to sit hand in hand with what works in terms of making a living. And you guys who watch my channel are very good. Most of you. Rob Crane makes bad jokes, but we can forgive him that. In that you do want to learn about subjects that are outside of that main focus. The Premier League subjects of World War II are what some channels cover, and we go down to the Conference League, the Sunday morning amateur football to cover the more obscure subjects. And so I think, if you're trying to make money out of history, there's a tendency to want to keep it to sort of special forces and the things that sell, like Midway and Iwo Jima and General Montgomery and Patton and things like that. And it's a catch-22, because when some of these authors have tried less sexy books, they haven't sold as well as the sexier subject books. So then do they then persist with the more obscure subjects, or do they try and recoup the sales with more popular subjects? So it's partly the responsibility of the historians to make sure they're pushing the envelope, but it's also the responsibility of the viewer, the reader, the consumer of World War II to be a bit broader in their interpretation, not just go into a shop and go, oh, another book on Market Garden, oh, another book on the SAS, although those books are great. And there are, so it's, but to answer your question, yes, absolutely. I think there's ample room for thousands more books on World War II. So that's that one. War Footprints. Any plans to do some more How to Be a Historian shows? Really enjoy them so far. Absolutely. There will be some of them. There's a couple I have in the pipeline that will be airing in the next few weeks. And I'll be doing a series at some point. I don't know when it's going to be. I'll have a sip of beer. Hang on. That was more than a sip. That was a gulp. About how to use the archives. So how to research not just family history, but how to there's someone who contacted me who's writing a book about the 43rd Wessex Division, I think it is. It is. And obviously he's started with some work, but he's asking people like me, are there any avenues that that I should approach, or what would be your advice and things like that? So I was probably one of several people he contacted, and so I'm going to be doing a set of shows offering people. It won't be me. I'll have guests on. One of them is in the audience right now. Mark is going to come on and talk about how to research RAF missions and service records, etc. So there will definitely be more of those coming up. Now, because I've been talking, I now have to go scroll through and find some more questions now. So let me do that. I'll tag a few, and then I will then I'll go to and do some. Just talk amongst yourself. I'm just going to save them, and then I will come back and answer some. So just talk amongst yourself, talk amongst yourselves, blah 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 blah. Here we are. All right, I've got some questions. Scott says, were you involved in a new Tom Hanks History Channel World War II documentary series? Yes, is the answer. I did have to sign a NDA, a non-disclosure document, so I can't tell you absolutely everything. I tell people in the pub a little bit more about what I did, but I recorded for 3 of the episodes. What was it for? 3. I did about 2.5 hours of filming in Whitechapel, London last year, and as far as I know, they seem to like what I did, and so I think I will be appearing as a talking head, not in this hat, but in a similar hat when that comes out. I do not know very much about exactly what it's covering, in the sense of, I know some of the episode titles. I don't really know that I'm fully aware of kind of what theme it's doing. I know that, as far as I know, they're not using any veteran testimonies. They're just using historians. They're not going back and using any old interviews of veterans, which is interesting. It's as for how good it'll be, I think it'll be very good. I think it will, again, it relates to the question I just said, is that, World at War back in the 70s was 26-hour-long episodes. I don't think Tom Hanks' series is going to be that. I think some people are saying it's 13 episodes plus some Holocaust ones. I don't know. So that inevitably there'll be a Normandy episode, for which I have contributed to. Now, compared to the level of detail I do, or compared to the level of detail Michael Ackerman or Dan Hill, it will be not that level. But for people who haven't watched a series about World War II, which is mostly who it's going to be aimed at, it's aimed at the kind of people who watch, well-known documentary series on baseball, or serial killers, or whatever. It's aimed at a general audience, and they're using some very good historians. So it probably will be a little bit basic's not the right word, but under detailed for some of us. But it'll be for the people who don't know much about World War II. I think it'll be remarkable. And the point is, it will put, as all these things do, as the film Nuremberg does, as Peaky Blinders did in a weird way, talking about World War II, it shines a spotlight on the subject. And so people like me and all the other channels will be carried along in its wake, we hope. So at some point when it starts coming out, I'll be able to talk a bit more about it. Another question. While doing tours, how often were you asked questions you had no idea the answer to? Do you have any examples? It's a very good question. And the ones that would stump me were the ones where people were coming at the subject from a very specific point of view that I hadn't considered. So one example, years ago, it was a couple, I think, it was a family, and it was the lady, the mother, said, we were talking about Montgomery commanding the 21st Army Group and Rommel commanding Army Group B. And she asked me how much impact it had on their decision-making, the star signs they were born under. And she was also interested in the Chinese characters as well. And I had never even given any thought to what time of year General Montgomery was born, Field Marshal later, and Rommel. And we looked it up, because I think they had a phone, or I had, and we found out their birthdays. And I remember her saying something along the lines of, well, a Virgo would have always had the upper hand over a Capricorn, or whatever their star signs were. Now, this lady was very invested in this and believed in all that stuff. I don't. And whatever you do watching this, you're entitled to your own opinion. But that was the kind of question that I'd never thought about that. Another one I can think of as one I couldn't answer, and it was with an autistic lad. And I'm 57 years old now. I don't know when I was really aware of the spectrum of Asperger's and autism, but certainly as a teenager, I don't think I was aware of it. And certainly in my 20s, I don't know that I was fully aware of it. Now it's a term that we use all the time. But this was early in my guiding when I had heard of the term, but I'm not knowledgeable about it now, but like most of us, it's something that's talked about more on ADHD and things like that. So, and this family, and they're American, the boy was about 10 or 11, something like that. And he had some very specific ways his brain worked. And I was told in advance how it would be, and not to expect eye contact and things like that. And it was a really, really rewarding tour. I think he enjoyed it, and the parents definitely got a lot out of it. And I think I got a lot out of it as well, because it pushed me to think of different ways of explaining things. And the question I got was about Zimmerit. And Zimmerit is the anti-magnetic stuff Germans painted plastered on the front of their armored vehicles, so that magnetic mines that they were confronting in the Russian Eastern Front, they wouldn't stick. And the kid asked me about Zimmerit, and I said, yes, it's the stuff they put on the front of the tanks to stop mines sticking. He said, what was it made of? And I said, well, it was made of a zinc alloy, and there were wood shavings, and there was a glue compound to it. And so, and he said no, because I hadn't given the exact data. He knew the exact, if you like, recipe for Zimmerit. And he said, and I'm not remembering the exact figures, but he would say it's 16% zinc alloy, 12% this, 50% this, 14% this. And he listed it all back there. And I was impressed with his recollection of that. So that's the sort of questions that will stump me. Or on a more kind of philosophical, subject, people will say, how has being a tour guide affected me as a human being? And I would think about that, and I would probably give some considered response, and it would be changing all the time, depending on where I am in my journey, so to speak. So those kind of questions would open up things. But if it was a regular question about the regular Normandy campaign, I would normally 99 times out of 100. If I didn't know the exact answer, I would have a ballpark kind of, well, I think it's probably that answer, because I've been doing it a long time. And, it's a subject I know pretty well. But I will tell you, as a tour guide, you still get the nerves. I mean, I'm doing very little guiding now. I haven't done a single tour yet this year. When you get an email from the person who's doing the booking, and perhaps it's a wife booking for a husband, or it's a daughter booking for a father, or whatever it would be, or one person booking for a group of people, whatever it would be, and they say, oh, Jeff, Bill, Bob, Tim, Jim, Sonia, Carol, whatever, in the tour group is a real expert in World War II and the Battle of Normandy. And when you're going out that morning, you're thinking, because, will they put a question out there that will stump me? And the reality is it hasn't happened very often. And it's not because I know lots. It's because you're in an environment where you're covering an area. If you're standing in somewhere, it's because you know about that place. If I'm standing in Tilly-sur-Seulles, it's because I know what the battle is that occurred there. If they ask me something about a town I've never heard of, do you know what happened in the town of I'll go, I'm not sure. And then I will look it up and say, that's near Saint-Lô, so that would be the so-and-so. So sometimes I don't know the exact specific reference, but then I could turn it very quickly to something I do know about. So so there we are. That's that one, I think. Terry, any plans to cover small arms? I've thought about it, as I've thought about doing stuff about uniforms and equipment. And kind of the reason I haven't is that there are some channels specifically doing that stuff very, very well. And I might get a little bit kind of narked if they started sort of stepping into my lane, and I don't want to think that I'm stepping into their lane. So there's that fantastic channel about rations. So no, not specifically, because I just think I think other people are doing it very well. So that doesn't mean that something won't come up if someone contacts me who's written about something rather, or got a particular thing to say about a particular weapon system. I of course I might consider it, but it's more likely to be on something a scale or two up from small arms. So if someone, for example, contacted me, and if you are that person that you're watching right now, and for example, the deployment of anti-aircraft machine guns on half tracks or towed anti-aircraft, that's the kind of thing I could think about doing, because they were used in all sorts of river crossings and things by the US Army. So if someone said, I've been studying the M16 quad mounted 50 cals, I've looked at which units had them, how they used them, how they modified them, that's the kind of show I think I would do. But so I'd have a kind of a medium arms, large arms compared to small arms. But never say never, because I say people contact me all the time with ideas, and I go, yeah, cool. I very rarely do I get an idea and I go, oh no, that's terrible. I go, yeah, cool, no, brilliant, yeah. Like the combatives show yesterday, when Chris proposed it to me, I was like, yeah, sure, let's do it, because he had the expertise. So there we go. The term mopping up comes up often, and yeah, how often do you think historians should approach mopping up operations in context? I mean, it's because mopping, I have a problem with it, with the term, but I think sometimes it can legitimately be mopping up. If you really are in the absolute last throes of a battle and the enemy have mostly gone, and there's just a couple of holdout soldiers left in a town who are out of ammo or something like that, then I think in those situations you can legitimately use the word mopping up. Although that doesn't mean soldiers still won't get killed. You need that. I mean, if you step on a landmine that hasn't been cleared at the end of an operation, that's kind of in the mopping up phase. But I think it's a bit of a throwaway comment that does a bit of a disservice to the winding down of operations, because you've brought up an interesting subject, because a lot of military operations start at a very specific date and time. H hour is dawn on so-and-so. And, an artillery barrage starts and formations start moving out, or whatever, a bombardment starts, etc., etc. And then there may be a goal that operation has, such as we're going to get to this town. And then you get into that vagueness of how loose a lot of orders in World War II were. And you look at how Eisenhower is giving instructions to Montgomery and other army commanders. I still think Eisenhower is pretty damn good. Zita has given me cause to reflect on some of Eisenhower's stuff, but sometimes he'll say something like, if the situation seems appropriate, push on and reconnoiter towards the enemy. Something like that. What does that mean? What if conditions are favorable? What does that mean? How? So I think there you get to the point where an operation has maybe run out of steam before it gets to its objective, or it has succeeded in getting its objective, and you're in that kind of, well, what should we do now, folks, kind of scenario. So consolidation of a position, reinforcing a position, getting some heavy equipment, bringing forward, scouting ahead. That's also into that area of, is it part of the operation? Is it mopping up? Is it scout? When is scouting, and when is scouting mopping up? All those things. So I think I like the fact we're in an environment now where we look at the language we use, and we look at what is meant. The other one I think is the milk run in terms of aerial bombardments, strategic bombing. And people got killed on milk runs. So a milk run has come to kind of mean nothing happening at all, which it never really was. It sort of meant to be not a majorly crappy raid going miles and miles into enemy held territory, blah, 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 blah. I mean, even the Operation Manna type things, when they were dropping food and stuff, the Dutch in 1945, there were still engine failures. There's still, accidents. There's still things going wrong, even on operation where there is technically no enemy. So milk runs is another term that's that can be loose. I think this is why when you're doing a book and you bring up a term like that, you bring up something like mopping up. I'm going to try and do this with my writing, is put an asterisk, put a footnote and say, in this context, mopping up meant rounding out a few last people. So try and explain what you mean by the term when you use it. I like those books that have a bit of a glossary at the beginning, explaining, by this, I mean this. Because Joe Balkowski does that with his books on Omaha Beach and what have you. He kind of explains how he's setting out his stall, so to speak. So that's that one. I've now got to find a few more questions. So let me scroll down again. I'll have some beer while I'm looking. There's a good one there. There's another one there. Another one there. I'm just earmarking some, bookmarking some. And it is very helpful when you put Q at the beginning so I can see it. Right, I've got a few questions again. So let's start off. Just a small question. When talking about British Indian Army, why do people only mention modern-day India and not say countries like Pakistan, Burma, Bangladesh, and Nepal? Well, they do sometimes use those terms. There's no hard and fast rule. One of the things I will get comments about, and my guests will get comment about, is when a guest will say Russians when he means Soviets. Now, sometimes you can say Russians when you're specifically talking about Russians because you're talking about a Russian infantry formation. But sometimes, yes, correctly, it should be Soviet or Red Army. It's shorthand, isn't it? That's sometimes if you're in the narrative, if you're trying to maintain a narrative. I'm arguing against myself now because I just explained the importance of footnotes explaining things. But I think in something like a YouTube or podcast, if every time you got to a word that you really should break it down and say different things, you would derail the narrative a little bit. So, we would say the Indian Army, and we would now know that the Indian Army would be made up from people from other places, specifically from India. So it's, sometimes people like myself and historians make a genuine mistake, and sometimes we're doing it for the point of view of just keeping it sort of easy to follow. It's Alex Churchill did one of her up daily kind of the books she gets in the post, and she got a book in French about the Battle of Britain, but because it was French, it said the Battle of Le Bataille d'Angleterre, the Battle of England, because the French will often routinely say England when they actually mean Great Britain or the United Kingdom. So it's sort of annoying, but it's also just the way they use their language. So I absolutely see where you're going with that, and clarity is important, but sometimes you have to just condense. It's like movie mate. You have to kind of condense things down a bit. It's like when we say the Juno is a Canadian beach, which it was, but there are British forces there. Utah is an American beach, but yes, there are some British there. Gold was a British beach, but there are some Americans there. If every time you always included the things that come under the umbrella that aren't necessarily pertinent, the reason you're mentioning something, you would just derail conversations with unnecessary or sometimes unnecessary detail. And I'm now going too much into this question with unnecessary detail. So that I absolutely see your point, and we should be more careful sometimes. Seamus, what is your opinion of the trailer for Pressure? I haven't seen the second one yet, because the second trailer came out a few days, but I haven't seen yet because I just haven't. The first one, which was about 2 weeks ago, I saw it. I think it looked pretty good. Some pretty cool people were asked their opinion on things. Again, I did do a little bit of work on that. I signed a non-disclosure agreement, so I can't tell you particularly about what I did or didn't do, but I did see the script. I have read the script. I don't know whether that was the script that was actually shot. It was the working script about 3 weeks before they went to production. I'm happy with what I've seen in the trailer. I think it's going to be good. There'll always be people who say Brendan Fraser's too short or too young or too old, or Andrew Scott is too short or too young or too old. Why didn't they do this? Why didn't they mention that? You know, again, it's like Nuremberg. They're going to have to condense the story a little bit, add a bit of drama, add a bit of tension, because they want people to be interested in it. But I think it looked pretty good. So that's that one. Grant, yeah, I am on a panel with 3 others. What is the discussion topic, and who are the other 3 guests? Well, I mean, if we stick to World War II, there's things. If it goes into movies, it's another thing again. If it's into, you know, I don't know, football, there'll be something else again. In terms of World War II, I mean, I love talking to John Parshall. I think he's fantastic. I don't agree with everything Rick Atkinson writes, but I hope when he's finished his revolutionary stuff, he comes back into World War II. But again, I think he'd be good value to talk to. James Holland, Al Murray, always good value. Rob Lyman, for terms of World War II things. I mean, there's so unlimited numbers of people that I could talk. I mean, what I think I like is when you get a slightly eclectic mix of people on a panel where they don't necessarily all agree completely, because you're more likely to get a sort of healthy conversation out of that, you know. So the reality is, people like me, James Holland, Al Murray, Rob Lyman, Jack Bowser, all that, we're all kind of middle-aged British guys. Some of us are a bit younger than others, some are older than others, but you might get a sort of a similar way of thinking. But if you've got a historian from Australia or a historian from Hong Kong or Moscow or whatever it would be, you might get more variety. So if it was music, it would be Dave Vanian from The Damned, possibly. I wish there was someone left from the band, you know, the Canadian band, Robbie Robertson, Levon Helm. I would love to have spoken to one of those guys. Levon Helm probably is my American hero of that era, one of my American heroes of that era. You know, this is the kind of dinner party guests, alive or dead. Eddie Cochran would be up there as actors, John Mills, people like that, I think would be really interesting. So film directors, David Lean, I don't know. There's so many people I want to talk about. James says, impressed you've got IPA in France. Well, okay, there's 2 things going on. That's not as easy a question as it appears to be. This is English IPA brought over from England. And I like English IPA, which is more in the kind of the ale way. France kind of exploded with IPAs about 5 years ago. Kind of after COVID, it seemed to come in. So most bars, most pubs in France will now have at least one IPA on tap, which was unheard of 10 years ago, and maybe another 1 or 2 in bottles. I don't mind IPA. It's not a session beer for me. If I'm going to go to the pub, I would not drink 3 or 4, 5 IPAs. I would want to have ale or something else, but that you can get IPAs quite readily in France. They are probably more of the American California style IPAs than this. This British Greeny King one has no sort of citrus notes, any of that stuff, which I don't mind in the summer. But your French IPAs, and they have some American imports, tend to be that kind of citrusy, woody kind of notes, that kind of caramelly kind of IPAs, fruity IPAs. I like them, but they're not a session beer for me. So that's that one dealt with. Susan, what is the most important lesson we have learned from World War II that we could use right now? I mean, togetherness and working with nations for common goals, even if those nations are not in complete agreement, I think is the key lesson there. I'm always reminded, Susan, of one of the, if not the very first time the two-word phrase United Nations was used was in Eisenhower's D-Day bulletin that the tree he printed out. He didn't print them. Someone printed thousands of them, tens of thousands, and they were given to the troops. And he said, "We are United Nations." And I think it's come up so often on this channel that the relative disharmony between the Allies was disharmony. It was families having agreements, but it would mostly end with a hug, and things got pretty strained. We talked about Mers El Kabir and the British and French 1940. Recently, that strained things between the British and the French. USA and Britain's relationship gets pretty rocky at the time of Operation Torch. Canada's relationship with other nations gets a bit problematic. Australia's relationship with the UK is complicated. Australia's relationship with the USA is complicated. Obviously, the British relationship with Soviet Union, America, they get complicated. But the Germans, the Third Reich, are absolutely at each other's throats, and as they are with the Axis. I mean, we should be really grateful that the Italians, Germans, and Japanese never really tried to do anything in any kind of combined way. The Italians and Germans did a bit, obviously in North Africa, and obviously they're observers between Japan and Third Reich. They never try and really coordinate anything. And in the German army and the German military, and it's falling apart. The Italians, I mean, they can't agree. The Japanese and the Navy, the army. So I'm going off on a bit of a tangent, Susan, but I think that working with people you don't completely agree with, but you will find that common ground. That is where I see as a middle-aged man now, we just don't find any common ground. And when I go to the pub and people ask me about my views on things, there's certain things that I'm very opinionated about, but I absolutely welcome the conversations I have with people on the other side of the fence. So JD and me, for example, so JD, History Underground, we are poles apart in terms of belief and faith. I'm an atheist. I've been an atheist pretty much all my life. I've always found it, never believed. JD is very, very much an active Christian. We just have these great conversations where we put questions to each other and we go, and I like that. I like the ability to talk with American friends about things that we don't necessarily see eye to eye on, and reproductive rights and genders and things like that. But if you just sit and listen to people and just treat them with some bloody respect, it makes everything so much easier. And I know these are obvious lessons, and I know the world is at each other's throat right now, and people like me, oh, you're just, you can't always just have a hug with people, and you can't forgive your enemies. And I get all that. I get there's a certain point where you go, no, I don't like your opinions, fuck you. I see that sometimes. But back to what you said there, working together, we are better as a species when we work together. I'm firmly in belief of that. I'm firmly in belief of looking after people who are lower than you, getting more help from people above you. I suppose I'm a pretty fervent socialist. I believe in, putting back in so that when you're in times of trouble, you can take things out, government-funded healthcare, that kind of stuff. So I got off on a tangent. People will be leaving in droves now because I'm giving my opinions. But I just think working together is a very key thing. So thanks for the question, Susan. Best one so far. Seamus, in your time researching World War II, which commanders have come in most into fashion and which ones have gone most out of fashion? Now, that's a really good question. I'll just have another sip of beer. So it's not just World War II, is it? I mean, when I was in my 20s, and I visited Gettysburg. That's the beer doing that. I visited Gettysburg in 1999. So I was 30. And this is when in the UK, if you knew anything about the Civil War, you kind of went, oh, well, Robert E. Lee, what a genius he was, and now the world doesn't think that. It's not just because of the fact he fought for the Confederacy. It's people have now genuinely brought into question his tactics, his approach, and things like that. And Meade on the Union side has had a bit of renaissance. So it's not just the World War II, World War I. You're dealing with the whole lions led by donkeys stuff that's been going on for years and years and years. And some of the First World War commanders like Haig, and I'm from the Blackadder goes fourth generation, where Haig and the British Army generals were monsters, the General Melchett, meh, kind of thing. And now we realize some of the World War I commanders, the Great War commanders, were actually pretty capable. with World War II, I mean, MacArthur, I think, has pretty... I don't think MacArthur's going to get back on the pedestal he was on at some point. Now, exactly when he was on that pedestal, I don't know, because people didn't agree with everything he was saying and doing back in World War II, but he came out of it on a pretty damn high, you know, when he would speak at West Point and places like that, 5-star general. I don't think MacArthur's ever going to go back to near the top again. Mark Clark has taken a bit of a hammering 20, 30 years ago, but people like James Holland are rating him higher. So he's on a bit of an up. I'm really intrigued about how Damian Lewis, who played Winters in Band of Brothers, playing Montgomery in Pressure, will affect how Americans think about Montgomery in World War II, because there's a lot of Americans who just don't even want to entertain the idea that General Montgomery was even halfway decent. And I don't think he was the best general of World War II, but I think he was pretty competent. And I can't think of anybody better than him to do the job of 21st Army Group in 44. That doesn't mean he was perfect. It doesn't mean everything he did was fantastic. He treats the Canadians pretty badly. Yes. But I can't come up with an alternative. It's, you know, better the devil you know, right? But Damian Lewis played Winters in Band of Brothers. So will Americans kind of find that they feel a bit more affection towards Montgomery because of who played him? I don't know. I mean, it's the Sean Connery, General Urquhart thing, right? I talked about this on a World War II TV show. At one point, the suggestion was going to be that Dirk Bogarde, who played Browning, was going to play Urquhart in A Bridge Too Far. And then Sean Connery came in. I don't think we'd see Urquhart with anything like the same affection if it hadn't been Connery playing him. Because we basically see James, you know, we see an older, wiser, with a kick-ass Dennison smog and a moustache. We see Sean Connery, James Bond, kicking the ass of Germans, and that bit where he shoots a German out the window with a 45 or Browning high power, I think it is. It's cool. So media portrayals, movie portrayals have an impact. And interestingly, as I've enjoyed this on the channel, some of Zita's interpretations about Eisenhower, I think he has dropped a little bit, but he's never going to be out the top 3 or 4. Eisenhower is still very, very much in favor. German commanders, you had the kind of the 70s era, 60s, 70s, where we were building all these guys up because it was the Cold War. The West Germans were our allies. We're trying to kind of celebrate the efficiency of better tanks, fewer of them, that kind of thing. So that's when the Germans are riding a crest of popularity. And it's not just the generals, it's the Adolf Gallans and the Luftwaffe races. And then in the more recent years, we realized some of them are murdering shitheads, and we don't quite appreciate them in the same way before. So the German generals have kind of dropped a bit. I think Rommel has finally lost legitimately the title of the good German. He's not the shittiest German by any means at all, but he's not some, you know, Robin Hood charitable figure who's a peace-loving, you know, he's invested in the regime and blah, blah. So that's a quite long-winded answer to your question there, Seamus, but thanks for that. I will scroll and find some more. Bruce says, Woody, as I see it, you're not just expanding the World War II knowledge envelope, you put it under the microscope. Well, that's nice. That's cool. Cool. Thank you. I will go and find some more questions. I'll have a bit more beer. That's a very deep question there. Ask anything, really. The universe is equal distance from you. Are you at the center of the universe? If you're having a pop at the fact I'm having an Ask Me Anything, well, don't be here, Kyle. I mean, you don't have to click on the link. You don't have to watch this. It's the channel that I host, and mostly 9 times out of 10, not 29 times out of 30, I'm the host. The guest is giving their information. Every now and then, the viewers like to put questions to me. I don't consider myself the center of the universe. I do, however, think I have some opinions, and some people seem to like hearing them. If you don't want to be here, Kyle, you know where the door is. Cheers. Thanks. What has been your favorite show so far this year? Oh, gosh. I don't know. Whatever I've just done. I know it's an easy answer. I mean, yes, I don't know. They've all been good. I haven't got a favorite. Mega Blogs, I saw your comments about the Barracuda on YouTube. seem getting quite hot under the collar. I saw in the comments there on that show there. Yeah, we've done against the Italians. We've done some of that stuff. Not recently, I have to confess. It's one of those areas that there are other people. Alexander Clark, Dr. Clark, is covering a lot of the Mediterranean War. It's the naval side of things. I will do shows when they come up. You know, we did the British attack on the French Navy a couple of weeks ago. Sure, I'm sure things will come up again. So I will take issue with this. I have to say, I don't know how to pronounce your name. You're one of my regular viewers since the beginning. You're quite fierce in your responses. When you say you have the facts, you will say that you are right and everyone else is wrong. And you know, if you know anything about World War II, Dave, there's always different opinions. There's always open to interpretation. I don't think I am idealistic about Allied soldiers. I'm not. Your thing about claims is, and I've confronted you about this in the comments. You never say your sources. You just say in my list. I don't know who you are. I don't know if that's your real name. I don't know where you live. I don't know your age. I don't know what you've published. I have asked you in the past, cite your source. Have you got a website? Have you published this data? Where are your sources? How have you taken them? You may well be right. I don't know. You may well be wrong. But the point is, when you challenge a historian who comes on, who's done their research, they will explain where they've got their data from. They will have their footnotes saying they looked at the data from this, and this. And they explain often on their shows where they get their data. Now, if you disagree, you're perfectly entitled to disagree. And I welcome that kind of comments. I am skeptical, but I tend not to take huge amounts of notice from people who don't actually say who they are, what they're doing, and where they get their sources from. If you think I'm picking on you, I'm not picking on you, but then you have said that I'm too idealistic about Allied soldiers. So in a sense, you laid down the gauntlet. War crimes, I have covered Allied war crimes. I will cover Allied war crimes again. We talked about Ron Spears in the past with a V company. We will do that again. Of course, we've covered those things. It's come up. The reality is, of course, however you shape it up, and I'm not saying the Allies didn't commit war crimes, because of course they did. They commit them on a scale massively less than the Axis. And if anyone tries to suggest the Allies are doing things in equal footing than the Axis, then you're completely wrong, aren't you? The thing about the Axis is it's ideologically based. Of course there were shitheads in the Allied forces. Of course there were psychopaths. Of course there were people who got carried away and did things they shouldn't have done. And there's issues of, you know, the Moroccan troops got up some terrible stuff in the Italian campaign. We're not sugarcoating that stuff at all, and I will cover that one day. There were all sorts of things that happened, but they didn't happen on the scale that happened on the Axis. So but going back to your thing about when you said not lying about their successes, are you saying historians lie about their data, or are you saying veterans lie? Because we've addressed this many times. We've often said how claims are spurious and how, you know, if the Germans claim 20 and the Allies claim 5, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. I am very skeptical. That's exactly what I do for a living. I think you're being a bit harsh. As for your work, I would love to see your work. I would love to see what you've published. I would love to see where you get your data, which sources you use. Tell us where you get your data. Tell us the analysis you've done. Tell us the processes you use. Share your information. I will wait at some point in the next few weeks, some links in the comments to your work so we can have a look at it. Thank you. There we go. Cheers. Thank you. I will find some content, more questions. Rob Crane. I often read that American orders left a lot more to the initiative of officers on the ground, while British orders were more prescriptive. Is that correct? I think that probably is. Yeah, it's a sweeping generalization. But I think there's something about the way the American officer corps works in a slightly different way to the British officer corps, that there is a little bit more of a open to interpretation angle to American orders. Of course, what complicates it, Rob, and you know about this from the work you do, is you're talking about nations working together where, I mean, an example in modern language is the word quite, okay? So as I understand it, Americans can correct me on this. If an American person says the meal was quite good, they mean it was actually very good. quite good means very good. To a British person, quite good means it wasn't that good. It was quite good. It was okay. So there's a simple word where we use it slightly differently. So when you're thinking about officers giving orders to multilingual forces, to multinational forces, of course it got very woolly. Of course it got complicated. Of course there was misunderstanding. That was it. Here's a good one. Maybe a silly question. Was Caen meant to be taken on D-Day? It's not that complicated, actually. The order states that Caen is an objective, but if it can't be realistically taken on D-Day, it is to be masked, I think is the word they use, meaning to make sure that you've got your forces in such a way is that there's no more threat from Caen towards the eastern flank of the beaches. So it sort of was an objective, but it also, there was part of the plan was that it's about cutting it off and reducing the threat. So the other thing, and I've said this many, many times, is that what is really meant by Caen anyway? Does it mean getting your feet to the northern part of Caen in the city suburbs, so to speak? Does it mean the city centre near where the rivers are and the cathedrals, or does it mean the high ground beyond? I mean, it's open to interpretation. What is meant about Caen? So it's a big subject, and Andrew Harrison has been on the channel and talked about Montgomery and Caen before. It's not quite clear. It is clear what is said in the orders, but there's a certain, again, about interpretation. But no, it was about preventing Caen as a threat is the main thing of the orders that I think. Anyway, Seamus, another question from Seamus. As a Normandy specialist, well, I don't know about that. What's your opinion on Miles Dempsey? Well, he's always the bridesmaid, never the bride, isn't he? I mean, we never talk enough about him. I can't remember whether he wrote his own book or not. I can't remember if he wrote his memoirs or not. I don't think he did. He just never seemed to really talk much about it. So, you know, Second Army Commander, he's fighting under the shadow of someone who is far more press important than Montgomery and Eisner. So what, you know, Miles Dempsey could say something at a press conference. Everyone's going to ask Montgomery the questions. It's like when they do those panelists of actors, and there's the fifth supporting actor who's sitting on the right, and no one asks him or her a question because they keep asking the question to Matt Damon or Tom Cruise, or it would be. And Miles Dempsey kind of falls into that category, is that he doesn't really ever get a chance to really express himself. But I think he's pretty good without being sensational. Woody, I absolutely love your podcast and how broad a range of World War II topics. Please keep up the great work. Thank you very much. I will keep doing that. Where did mopping up originate? I have no idea, Jim. I have no idea where that came from, mopping up. I have no idea. Wasn't me. Is there an Eastern Front battle I would like to cover? Yes, I mean, of course. There's lots of them. One of the things about the Eastern Front, I'll have another sip of beer, is that when we have people like Prit Buttar on, and Prit is going to be on later this month, 29th, I think, or 28th, talking about Berlin, is you're talking about fronts, you know, and a Soviet front is, you know, multiple divisions. It's, you know, 500,000 men or more. So we very rarely get the chance to go down to kind of battalion level or regimental level and that kind of thing with the Eastern Front. I mean, we could do that if someone, and there are people, I mean, Jason Mark came on and talked about the Pioneer Battalion. He talked about, that was a good show. That was one of my favorite ones this year so far. But there's a bit more difficulty getting down to the granular level, because even Google Earth, oh, excuse me, but windy pops, the Google Earth doesn't have the ability to zoom into the detail of certain parts of the Soviet Union, what was the Soviet Union, compared to how we can look at Normandy. We can see down individual streets and alleyways and work out whether a Sherman tank backed down this hedgerow or that hedgerow. That kind of information isn't there. Same with when Jack looks at the Burma campaign, Myanmar, whole parts of Myanmar haven't had the Google Earth level of analysis that other parts of Europe have. So we tend to look at the Eastern Front from a more operational point of view rather than kind of that lower down. So I'd love, but you know, if we started breaking down the Eastern Front to individual battles, we'd be here for forever. It would take amazing amounts of time. Another one from Roderick. And I'll have opened my other beer because I'm nearly finished this one. And then after the second one, I'll have to stop because I will need to go for a wee. So this time, just for those who are following what it is I'm drinking, and that's the camera going out of focus, not my vision going out of focus. Now I have moved on to, you can't go wrong with an old speckled hen. So it's old speckled hen now. So other genres of history. 20 years or so ago, about more than that, when I went to Gettysburg, I mentioned now I went to Gettysburg, it got me off on a whole American Civil War spree, so to speak. And then I realized very quickly after buying 5 or 6 books that I could just spend the rest of my life just studying Gettysburg or the Atlanta campaign or whatever it would be. And it just was overwhelming. And I felt I was potentially going to get sidetracked into a subject I would never be able to wriggle my way out of. So I kind of went, okay, I'll stop reading about that. And I went sideways into American Indian Wars. And I read a lot about Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce and the Comanches down in Texas and things like that. So I've got a little shelf of books about the American Indian Wars. I find that very interesting. I haven't read much about that more recently. What I tend to do these days is when I want to refresh my knowledge of something like the Zulu Wars or the Gordon's campaigns in the Sudan, is I will speak to historians, friends I know, and I say, okay, what's the best book on the Sudanese campaigns, the British Army in the 19th century? What's the best book on the Zulu Wars? What's the best book on Israeli special forces and special operations was one, and I forget the name of the author now, but I got the book on that. So I will find a really good book, one that is peer reviewed, and I'll read that. So I lots of periods of history. Never really got into Vietnam. I don't know why. I never really got into the modern stuff, particularly because it feels too contemporary, feels too current affairs for me. So, and I don't go back to like English Civil War. I don't even do much Great War reading. The last Great War book I read was Alex Churchill and Nikolai's book, Ring of Fire. I'm seeing Alex Sunday night. We're talking about language again. Yeah, Dermot. Last year I got pulled up for saying Holland instead of Netherlands. And yet I know Dutch people who say that they support Holland. So in the football. So, you know, you could ask a group of Dutch people about their preferences and they would slightly disagree. You know, it's like people from Northern Ireland. Some absolutely fiercely say they're British. Some would say Northern Irish, and some would use the word Irish, but some wouldn't use the word Irish. It's down to pronouns and stuff, isn't it? We're going into woke speak there. But you know what one person thinks is the right term, other people will not think. But you're right, it can is. John, should Great Britain have created more divisions than it did? Final total of 48 seems lower. Yeah, probably. But where the hell are you going to get the people from? That's the question. I mean, there's an absolute manpower crisis. By 43, 44, we're having to put men into the coal mines. We're having to do. Men are still in reserved occupations. There's still farming. There's still this, that, and the other. There's the merchant navy. There's the coast guard. There's all that. There's all that. There would have been. There was no one left. There was no one left to put into the army. The navy is taking people. The RAF's taking people. Bomber Command lose 55,000. What the British essentially do is they solve the problem by using units from outside of Great Britain. So we're back to the Indian Army. We're back to the units they got from West Africa, East Africa, the Canadians, Australians, and New Zealanders, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So Great Britain, there was no one left. They have got to the bottom of the barrel and scraped beyond the bottom of the barrel. And with all due respect, the kind of people that are being recruited in 1944, they aren't the kind of people that would even pass. The US Army did exactly the same thing. They're relaxing the medical requirements. They're relaxing the vision. They're relaxing the physical fitness, the height, all those things. They're relaxing how many good teeth you have to have by 44 just to get enough people into khaki. So, they probably should have had more divisions, but there was no one left to ask. Phil Blood would be very good to be on a panel. Yeah. Phil Blood wouldn't play very well with some other historians, but I think he would. Let me find some more questions. Would the Americans have been better off using mosquitoes rather than B-17s? It's a bit of an apples and oranges question, isn't it? Because the mosquito is if it's anything, it's sort of but it's not even really a medium bomber, is it? It's a fighter bomber, and also it can be a fighter, and it can be a night fighter, and it can also just be a bomber. I don't think the B-17 was quite as great as everyone says it was. Neither was the 24, neither was the Lancaster. I think of the three, I kind of probably say the Lancaster was best, but the B-29 was pretty damn good, although they don't get to really get good at it until it gets too late to use it, if that makes sense. Like some of the later tanks, like the Chaffee and the Pershing and things like that, and the Comet, even the British Army, that by the time we get good at them, it's the war's coming to an end. I'm not an aviation expert, so I'm sort of stepping outside of my comfort zone. I think with the B-17, it wasn't so much the aircraft as getting all the box formations, getting all the training, getting all the how to deploy them, how that kind of thing, right. Right, Willie, which actor do you think appeared in the most war films? Well, one of the candidates has to be Percy Herbert, a character actor in loads of films. He was in Bridge on the River Kwai. He was in Sea of Sand. He was in The Wild Geese 20 years later. He was in like 30 years of war movies. Christopher Lee made a lot of war movies as a sort of second actor. Michael Caine made a lot of war movies. I mean, Christopher Lee was making war films on and off for a long time. So was John Mills, was making a lot of films. There's like it would be one of those character actor type people would have the highest total. Those ones that was in the background of so many films. Good. What is a military history topic you have not gotten a chance to cover that you really can't wait to learn more about? Yugoslavia in World War II. That's my my go-to response on that. And it's because I've talked about this before. It's because you're talking about an area that was at each other's throats and divided in a very complicated way in the 1940s. And then it got really bad again in the 1990s in Bosnia and Sarajevo. And then it's still not entirely sorted out right now. So the problem with dealing with historians from those places is that, I don't want to sort of speak out of turn about them, is that people from Bosnia and Herzegovina wouldn't necessarily want to be on a panel with someone from Serbia or Moldova. So there's lots of deep-rooted things there. But I think Yugoslavia in World War II is the unsung, underappreciated, less talked about theater. Now, some people say, well, it's not ultimately very important. Well, it's the butterfly effect that we talked about in the Battle of the Bulge a few weeks ago, the two-parter that Stuart did. The Germans throw a number of divisions into Yugoslavia they could have put elsewhere. The Italians put divisions in there they could have put elsewhere. The British are putting SOE teams, Americans OSS team. There's all sorts of resources being used there to help assist Tito, and that's another complicated subject. But I think it's a drain on German resources. It's affecting what's happening close by in Bulgaria and Romania. But I struggle to get any series of content about Yugoslavia off the ground before people just start not responding to emails or say, oh, I'm not sure what you're doing here. Why do you want to ask me this? And why do you want to? So that's my answer to that. Sam Kidd is another actor who did a lot of stuff. A dream brigade of 3 infantry battalions plus armored and artillery support. Which units would you pick and who would you choose to lead the brigade? Oh my God. Oh gosh. I suppose Sherwood Rangers Yeomanry might be my tank unit. I also might have chosen one of the independent American tank battalions, the 70th or someone like that. Infantry brigade, 69th, are good in the British 50th Division. One of the regiments from the American 3rd Division. I don't know which one particularly. One of them would be worth having, wouldn't they? Or 16th Infantry, the 1st Division, American. Or there's a lot of good ones, aren't there? There's Guards Armored. Who would I have to command it? Oh God. Gosh. Horrocks, maybe. No, not Horrocks. Oh, I don't know. I'll have to think about that one. I'll come and I'll answer that one in the next show. Remind me for the next one. Nick asking, I've often wondered why, when the Allies had ultra intelligence, did the Battle of the Bulge? Is that second part of that question? I mean, that's a very, oh yeah, here we go. Why did it come as a complete surprise? Well, it didn't. Well, we could spend hours on this. It didn't come as a complete surprise. I'm simplifying the history. Warnings were to some extent dismissed. Don't forget, ultra is just one aspect of information they're getting. It's reliable, but it's not the only thing. They're getting information from POWs. They're getting information from aerial photos, and I would probably say that the weight of evidence in early December 44 is that Germans are a bit broken, can't mount anything till the spring, and even though ultra said there's maybe something happening, it didn't maybe rate as it was not considered with the same weight as the evidence they gave from POWs, partly because the Germans are actually putting an effort into a deception campaign. They're putting an effort into concealing their intentions. We tend to think that it's the Allies that are the ones doing all the dirty tricks in terms of the Operation Mincemeat and Operation Fortitude and fake this and the fake that and inflatable Sherman tanks, all that kind of stuff. And yes, sure, the Allies are pretty damn good at that. But the Germans were capable of mounting their own deception campaigns and keeping things secret, and they did a pretty good job ahead of the Ardennes offensive to keep things sort of quiet. So David, someone always says Slim, General Bill Slim, as a suggestion as someone who could have done the 21st Armored Group job. I'm completely in agreement that he was very, very good. Of course, how well he would adapted to the ETO, we can only speculate. The thing is, and this is my standard response to this, is that why would you take Slim out of Burma? Why would you take him out of an area where he has all the years of specialist knowledge? The fact he speaks the language of most of the troops in 14th Army. He speaks Urdu and this, that, and the other, and he knows the Indian troops. He knows the West African troops. He knows he works around the monsoon. He knows the climate. He knows the problems of disease. He knows the logistics. He knows the Japanese army. He knows the British army that's been out there. He knows that theater very, very well. It's like saying, I don't know, back in the day when Manchester United were winning stuff, Alex Ferguson's a great manager. Put him in charge of the England cricket team. You're good at one thing doesn't necessarily mean it's a transferable set of skills. So I'm absolutely with you. Slim is a very, very good general, but you'd have to be a very, very brave prime minister to take him out of somewhere where he's seriously kicking ass and put him somewhere else where he's not suited. So there you go. That's my response to that. He may or may not have been good, but I don't know that he would have been any good. Let's find another couple of questions. Caswayne says, my take is Montgomery was perfect to lead a British formation using British doctrine and aligned British priorities, but that said, he would not have done well with US troops, doctrine, and priorities. Yeah, I can't find much to disagree with that. He gets on well with some Americans, like Simpson of the 9th Army. He and him get on very well, and they seem to find that mid-ground of meshing American and British methods quite well. So that's interesting. Let's keep going. So, yeah, sorry, man, but I'm military historian. I know you're a military historian, but tell us about what you've done. Tell us about where you're getting this stuff from. Put your work out there. Even put forward yourself as a guest. Come on, tell us what you know about stuff. There we go. We'll do that. The historians I bring on, they have primary sources. The thing is, primary sources can conflict with each other. You can have two sets of primary sources, but going back to the information, that will conflict with each other. A German Arthur Action report and an American Arthur Action report are talking about the same things. They're both primary sources, but they could both be wrong, or both be one could be correct, one could be wrong. I've learned a lot in my years doing this, and one of the things I know is I don't know it all. And one of the things is that every bit of information, there's a counter argument. There's alternative information. There's well, you say it's 6, I say it's 8. You say he did well, I say he didn't. You say they had 4 tanks, I say they had 8 tanks. Look at the work Roman did a couple of weeks ago on this US Marine Corps tanks. on Tarawa, where he was correcting his own research from 10 years earlier. It's constant. Keep on doing stuff. Simon, Woody, it's my dad's birthday soon. Could you recommend any recently released books on World War II? As I know he's read loads. Well, anything but Prit Buttar's Berlin book is coming out very soon. That's one that's definitely on the horizon. I'm sure there's others that are just not quite in my head right now. If I'm talking about it in the channel in the next few weeks, it'll be a good book. There's lots of them, but that's the one that immediately comes to mind. Prit is one of the best historians of all time. So let's keep on going. Why is not enough made of the Great Swan in the popular history? Now, there are two Great Swans, Dominic. There's the big fuck-off Great Swan. There's more than one that sits in the little reflecting pool pond bit in front of the National Archives in the UK that Mike Bechtold had his photo taken in front of when he was at the Archives a couple of days ago with the swans that sit there. We used to call it Q, Q, the Public Records Centre. There's those swan. That's a Great Swan. But you mean the advance of the Canadian and British Army up the coast. I know what you mean. I suppose it comes down to that principle that we find it difficult to deal with if there's one major thing happening in the war, that a slightly potentially secondary thing happening at the same time gets relegated to page 17 of the newspaper. So that, for example, December the 16th, 17th, when Battle of Bulge happens, things happening elsewhere in the ETO on that same day just don't get a look in. Market Garden, September the 17th. And I think at the time of the Great Swan, there's lots of things going on. Patton's Third Army is racing across France. You've got the different things going on elsewhere, strategic bombing going on. So I think sometimes it just gets a bit lost. It just gets a bit secondary. And, the battle has partly been won to bring the Canadians into World War II. I do not think we can legitimately say that Juno Beach is the forgotten beach now. It probably was the forgotten beach 20 years ago, although not forgotten, but less well talked about. But thanks to Ted Barris and Mark Zelke and David O'Keefe and Mike Bechtold and Alex Fitzgerald Black and who are the other ones, Mark Milner, and I'm sure there's others I'm not thinking of. Thanks to all their work, Juno is now talked about a lot, but that's like part of the battle. But now you've got to get people to read on about the other campaigns. And I think with Mark Zelke, his books on Normandy, I believe, have outsold his other books on the Italian campaign, for example. So, that you're into that. We're back into that comment I was making earlier about the viewership, the readership not stretching themselves enough. A book about the Canadians in Normandy, the Falaise Gap, is more likely to do well than a book about the Great Swan. So we're back into that catch-22 thing, is that people are writing the books that people are going to read. And the Great Swan, it's really interesting, but it's also not maybe terribly exciting, if that makes sense. But yeah, it's a good point. Let's find another one. Tommy Miller. Are you the Tommy Miller who played in the midfield for Ipswich about 15 years ago? I don't expect you're that Tommy Miller. If you are, you are great. I liked your second time with the club, particularly more than I'm sure you're not that Tommy Miller. It's a very common name. All right, Woody, the more I look at it, the more the Battle of the Bulge looks like some bad copy of Market Garden. Paratroopers trying to take bridges, single roads, etc. So if that sounds stupid, no, it doesn't sound stupid. But it's also the Germans repeating their own Normandy counterattack. It's Operation Lüttich on a bigger scale. Lüttich is a drive west to take a port, to drive a line, to break the Allied advance going south, and the Ardennes offensive is also that, going west for a port to blunt an advance. So it didn't work in Normandy for the Germans, and it didn't work for them in the Ardennes for the Germans. And yes, it has similarities with Market Garden, but then when you consider it objectively, any ambitious operation that's going to try and strike a blow is going to be kind of rapier-like, isn't it? if you're going to do something decisive, it's going to be some kind of single blow, some kind of thrusting in advance, which means you have to take objectives. You have to take bridges and city centers and crossroads and choke points. So I suppose we're going back to my interests in previous history. If you look at General Gordon in the Sudan, similar things there. An aggressive campaign was based on sort of hopping through various objectives and striking a blow inland or towards objective. You could say the Zulus is doing a similar thing in the Zulu War. So I think to some extent, by definition, any kind of ambitious plan is going to be narrowly focused. Otherwise, it just becomes a kind of the broad front strategy. I think I make sense with that comment. It made more sense when I was thinking about it in my head. What is your interpretation of the overall casualty numbers for World War II? Why did the Axis, despite losing, suffer significantly less military casualties than the Allies? Well, they have less people in the field. It's a good question, and it's more complicated than it seems at first glance. When the Axis do their 1940 stuff, or the Japanese, their 1941 stuff, they are the aggressors. They are coming out of the blocks when the world, broadly speaking, isn't ready for them. So the whole blitzkrieg thing of it being, a brand new type of warfare, no, it wasn't. It's been going back for decades. They've been using similar things to blitzkrieg, but they had, better motivation, better doctrine, better ideas, blah, 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 blah. By the time the Allies can respond and take back all the areas that they'd lost in 1940-41, so the island hopping in the Pacific, the British and Americans pushing the Germans back, the Allies are on the aggressive foot, but they're now facing a more competent, arguably better equipped Axis army in 43-44 than the Allied armies. The Allies aren't even the Allies in 1940. The Allies are a fractured group of nations who haven't really got their act together. And James Holland says it very well. Attacking is very hard. If you want to, modern military doctrine, and anyone who's serving right now, I think back in the day, 20, 30 years ago, he would say you would want to outnumber the enemy at least 3-1. These days, I think the preference is to be 5 or 6-1 outnumber the enemy. We're not going to get into what's happening in Iran or whatever, but that would be the kind of odds, because even if you've got the better tech, even if you've got the better weapons, you've got the better systems, the better leadership, attacking is costly. You're gonna lose more people attacking than you are defending, and the Soviets learned that in the slow campaign that the Third Reich fought as the Soviets pushed them out of Eastern Europe and pushed them towards Germany, is that even though the Germans were absolutely losing, they are able to kill a lot of Soviet soldiers because they're the ones in the defensive positions. They're the ones holding the lines. They're the ones in the bunkers, the Siegfried line, the et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's the answer, is that by the time the Allies are in a position to win the war, they are the aggressors, and being aggressive, attacking, means you suffer casualties. Look at Bomber Command, look at the 8th Air Force. They are absolutely slowly but surely weakening the German industry to the point where, the German military events up. The German war machine is on its last legs towards the last part of the war. But the costs it's taking, the amount of bombers we're having to drop, the amount of air crews we're losing to get that done, is indicative of how tough it is to be the aggressor. I think that hopefully is explained it. So I will carry on and find a couple of questions. Graham, what's your opinion of the contribution of the Inns of Court Regiment on D-Day behind the front lines in terms of their effectiveness? It's been a long time since I read about the Inns of Court, and they are one of those units that are probably deserving of a show on World War II TV. I'm going to kind of, it's been a long time since I read about it. They're in that kind of category. They're a bit like those kind of independent tank battalions, is that they're kind of trying to be a bit different. They're trying to be a combination of they're not quite a special force. They're not like a commando or an airborne, but they're kind of trying to do things. And yeah, I have to. You've got me thinking about looking that up and seeing what it is. So I haven't got enough response to that. But yeah, good bit of knowledge there. if you'd asked me that question on a D-Day tour, you'd have stumped me to some extent, because I'd had to have gone to my grey matter and be reminded of what it is they did, because I don't remember everything. Let's go down to some more questions, and I'll have a bit more beer. Have I tried the session ales from Old Speckled Hen or Hobgoblin? I don't think I have. I quite like a Hobgoblin. There's a Greenie King do, or someone do a kind of a copy of Old Speckled Hen called something else that's similar to Old Speckled Hen. It's quite nice. Anyway, we're talking about beer now. There's one from Kyle. Have I considered having AI assist you with research? Yes, and I have used AI a little bit. But you worded your question either well deliberately or well accidentally. And the key thing you hit upon there is assist. AI, as far as I'm concerned, is a tool that I and other creators of history will use to work for me. I will be the master, it will be my slave, right? When I'm coming to do things like indexing or finding references or extrapolating footnotes or looking for other references to something, it's like a very sophisticated, well, it theoretically can become a sophisticated search engine. The thing about search engine is a search engine doesn't try and tell you what it's thinking. A search engine is just a retriever dog. It says, have you got any information? You say to Google, which films did Michael Caine make in the 1960s? It just gives you a list. It doesn't start saying, well, I think the best of the films it made. It doesn't offer an opinion. AI is starting to offer opinions. The key to, and I will have a panel discussion at some point. I don't know when the hell it will be. Don't ask me, about AI, and I'll get a couple of people on who are pro AI and a couple of people who are much more AI skeptical, as I kind of am. What we can't have at the moment, and I don't want to see ever, is AI doing the creative stuff, right? I forget who said it. Someone said it, maybe a sort of stand-up comedian or someone said it, that I don't want to go and see an AI stand-up comedian. I want to see a human being. I may want to have the AI be in charge of the ticketing or something, or the allocation, they're doing the where's the best place to park aspect, but I don't want the AI doing the creative thing. AI and automation should allow us to do the things that we are uniquely equipped to do, which is the creative stuff. Create art, create music, write history, interpret statistics, consider the leadership qualities of Eisenhower and Montgomery and MacArthur. I don't want AI to do that for me. That said, I can see the benefit of kind of, if I'm going to do a book on Miles Dempsey, is say to AI, what is the considered wisdom about Miles Dempsey? So it could just kind of rattle off some stuff. But I'm not going to go, I'll copy, paste, and make that my book. No, I would use that very much as a starting point. So there we are. I will find another question or two. What is the most interesting subject within World War II? The sinews of war, logistics, how the fuck we got all the stuff to the places we had to get the stuff to, and just how much of that stuff we had to ship and move. And the numbers are just scary. And we are getting much more interested in this, in the logistics, but I think people still want to hear about fighter pilots and commandos and paratroopers and rangers and all that kind of stuff. And, the Americans had 30 plus railway battalions in the ETO in 1944, just some of them former railway engineers and train drivers and stuff, doing the shipping and moving of that. The people who built the incredible numbers of airfields, all that kind of stuff, the number of jerry cans that were produced was millions. The number of bandages, look at the show we did with Bill McAllister a few days ago about hemp. I mean, that, by the way, is a candidate for one of my favorite shows so far this year. Just the amount of hemp we need to make stuff blows my mind. So the logistics is probably the most interesting aspect of World War II, because everything else builds off that, right? Doesn't matter which fighter plane is the best fighter plane if they haven't got fuel. It doesn't matter which tank is the best one if there ain't no shells to fire through the barrel, there's no fuel, blah, 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 blah. So there we go. That's that one, I think. Let me find a couple more questions. I'm not getting anywhere near to answer them. Here's one. Winchester. Could the Allies have successfully carried out a cross-channel invasion of France in 42 or 43? The obvious answer is no, but maybe. What would have had to have happened is they would have to have known somehow in advance there'd have been a critical moment before the construction of the Atlantic Wall got done in earnest, when the Germans don't have that many people in Normandy, when they're still expanding it. Niels Henkemans would be the guy to speak to about that. In fact, we talked about that when he was on a year or so ago, is that absolutely the Allies are sort of landing craft, they're sort of LCTs, they're sort of all the stuff to go with stuff. 42 is really, really hard. But then again, the Atlantic Wall hasn't been really started properly. So what you lose in one area in terms of your Allied ability to field stuff, because by 44, we're still a bit short of stuff, but we have more stuff we had in 43. So the Allies would have been landing a smaller invasion force, but the Germans would have had fewer troops, if you time it right, to deal with it. So it might have been a benefit to the Allies, but you're into that whole speculation thing of when would it have been and what would the weather have been okay and would it have worked and who would have had as leaders. But it sounds like the obvious answer is no, they should have done it. But maybe with some Monday morning quarterbacking, with some 2020 vision, they'd have been looking at, if we'd chosen, I'm just throwing this date out in there, if we'd chosen, I don't know, January 1943 or something, the Germans hadn't got their so-and-so divisions here, they're still doing it, maybe you'd have found a weakness. Maybe you'd have found that chink in the armor. Maybe. Who knows? Going back to Yugoslavia, Veronica, exactly. There's the problem of the communist biased sources. And in some ways, also the rabidly anti-communist sources that are trying to dismiss the communist sources so madly that they're over-cooking, over-egging. Trevor, how are you doing, by the way, Trevor? Have I ever covered the global food supply? Not directly. That would be cool to do, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that be really good? And Trevor is saying the 3 battalions of Durham Light Infantry. I have to say that would have been my late friend Colin Taylor's suggestion. He'd gone, yeah, he'd have just said, we don't even need 3. Just send in 9th DLI. That'd be enough. Hitler would have given up, gone home. That's back to the which brigade, which regiments, blah, blah, blah. Find some more questions. And I'm not going to carry on too much longer because I will need to go over a wee eventually. And by the way, I had to shut the door because Chaos, my kitten, is just being so naughty. She would have been all over the place. So I've had to shut the door. I think she must be asleep because I can't hear her scratching, which is good. Or she's up to something. Oh, favorite beer of all time. I have 2 responses. And the beer I'm going to say first is one I haven't now had for a good 15, 20 years. I may be remembering it slightly better than it really was. And if anybody out there knows where they can still, I don't even know, I haven't looked it up. But if someone knows it still exists, I'd love to try some. So bring some over to Normandy for me. And it's Caffrey's. So Caffrey's is an Irish, it's an ale, but it's sort of got a kind of a Guinnessy feel to it. It's kind of got a heavier, kind of a creamy ale. And God, I loved Caffrey's. But you couldn't get it in pubs very often, unless you're in Ireland. David Duffy, if you're watching still, do they do Caffrey's still? Tell me, send me a private message that they still do Caffrey's. Because if you're coming, next time you come, if you know where to get it, bring me some fucking Caffrey's. I love that. I love that stuff. It was just a lovely pint. I used to buy in cans. It was a green can. So I'm going off into a dreamy memory of how lovely Caffrey's was. Anyway, so Caffrey's is based on my memories of it, my favorite beer of all time. More recently, I love a Doom Bar. I love a Doom Bar or Ghost Ship, which actually is an IPA. And I said I didn't like IPAs that much, but it's a British IPA rather than kind of American-y style one. Although I do like American bourbons. So there we go. That's a separate subject. Wondrous Rep, could you please recommend any material to me that focus on the British push from Bremen towards Hamburg, particularly the 53rd Welsh? Jonathan Ware's book on the 53rd Welsh is, I believe, imminent. He's reassessed history on social media. Find his work. He's done some stuff about 53rd Welsh. He is the go-to guy on the 53rd Welsh. There's an old book by Patrick Delaforce that covers it, but it's a bit patchy. But that would be my suggestion there. Would you be interested in covering any Korean War historians? I am doing a Korean War show with David Allison, who did one about the Indian paratroopers a year or two ago. But it's about specific. I said yes because it's about, his book is about the Korean War, but he wants to angle it as 10 specific kind of doctrinal lessons the British Army took from World War II into Korea. Some worked and some didn't. So it has a foot firmly in the World War II camp. I'm not going to be doing anything. Oh yeah, John Parshall's 42 book in terms of a book recommendation for your father, that question earlier. But I'm not going to go into talking about the Korean War as a separate thing because I've got too much World War II stuff to do. So no. Here's one about Wingate and the Chindits. Right. So there's quite a lot to unpack there. The Chindit concept worked, and the Chindit concept, once improved, finely tuned, and built on, was the long-range patrolling stuff Americans did in Vietnam. It was what the British were doing in places like Aden and Borneo in the 60s. And Wingate, for coming up with that, was, I don't know, that genius is maybe a bit too much. The concept was there. What obviously went wrong was not enough understanding of terrain, not enough ability to resupply, the disease, the deprivations, all that kind of stuff there. So had the conditions been optimal, I mean, Longcloth, I guess is the most famous Chindit operation. I mean, a lot of things went wrong that probably were destined to go wrong with what they knew back then. It's hard to describe, isn't it? It's like that. I don't know. It's like that film director who makes a first film that's like, okay, I can see what you're doing there, but it takes the third film before he finds his, or she finds his feet. And I think that's the Chindit concept was incredibly important. Just the same thing applies to all the special forces stuff, airborne operations. I mean, the Germans kind of came out the gates flying with Fort Eben MAR and the gliders there. Is that was like an optimum demonstration of how to use airborne forces and stuff, and the taking of the bridges and stuff. But then some of the next airborne operations, the Germans and British and others mounted, didn't go so well. And probably when you look at World War II in balance, as many airborne operations didn't work as ones that did work. It's like gambling. You remember your wins, not your losses. So I've got on a bit of a tangent there, Grey K8. But I think the Chindits will go down, and what the Chindits did will go down as being incredibly influential. It's like that. It's like someone asked me about music. So one of my favorite musicians is Eddie Cochran. 20 Flight Rock, something else, great stuff. He died, he was 21 years old. He died in the crash. Gene Vincent was in his way in England. It was coming away from a gig in 1960. And Eddie Cochran, everything he recorded before he was 21 years old. So he's not known as an absolute genius in music because he died when he was 21. If he lived even just 5 years longer, look what Paul McCartney achieved before he was 30. Look at what Jimi Hendrix achieved. Look at what, so sometimes the concept is there and the idea is there, but it takes refinement. And that, I think, is the Chindits in absolute, by definition, that's what the Chindits is. It's the idea is fantastic. It's just, anyway. So my guest is saying he's blacklisted. We'll have to talk about that because I don't know of anyone who's blacklisted. Who are you blacklisted by in terms of your... Anyway, whatever. We'll get into that some other point. Let's find a couple of questions. Were Gold, Juno, and Sword underdocumented because of the American film industry? I don't think it's the fault of the American film industry. I think it's as much the fault of the British film industry. But yes, in essence, yes. I mean, Juno famously doesn't get referenced at all in The Longest Day. There's a lot of things to do with this, and the film industry is part of it. I think there was a hesitancy because of the British and Canadian character to sort of underplay what they did, and it's not saying Americans overplay. It's being comfortable talking about what you're good at. And I think, generally speaking, people on the other side of the Atlantic, for me, are more, I watched some of these business things online, and the confidence with which people from North America talk about, and I did this and I did that, and it's great. I admire I think British veterans tended to be a bit kind of, well, we were just doing our job, and lots of shuffling of their feet. And some of the memoirs and some of the books after war were a bit sort of, they didn't help the cause, whereas some of the American generals and writers were sort of being a bit more, and we ran across the field and we threw the grenades in the Japanese bunkers, and I think there's something to do with the British character, underplaying, sort of reticence. Maybe these are cliches, but the film industry didn't help. But it's not the American film. I have no problem with the American film industry churning out movies about U.S. Marines in the 1950s and all that kind of movie. That we should have been making those movies ourselves. And we tended to make more of the naval epics and the RAF stuff. The Angels 1-5 and Cruel Sea and Sink the Bismarck. We didn't really do much about the British infantry. It's back to that. It's maybe to do with the class system as well. Is that a lot of the British Army regiments were kind of working class lads. Steel workers from Sheffield and miners from Newcastle and farmers from, whatever. So it's a good question, Jay. But I'm not going to blame just the Americans for that. I think there's a lot of reasons why the gold Juno sword were underplayed. So let's, and it's the as a percentage, you're probably right. The Allies probably it depends how you break down your casualties. The thing about the British and American and Canadian armies in 44 is they're incredibly rear heavy. You're talking about less than 10% of the British and American armies are your infantry and tank drivers and tank crews. The 90% is logistics. It's back to that question about getting all the stuff there. And the reality is, as vital as your job was in the Royal Army Service Corps or the American U.S. Ordnance Corps or the U.S. Red Ball Express, whatever it was, your chances of being killed in combat were remarkably less if you're in one of those units than if you're carrying a M1 or a Lee Enfield in an infantry unit. The Germans are much more top-heavy or less tail-heavy. It's one of the reasons it's a bit abstract, this. I'm going off on a tangent again. Is one of the reasons the Germans thought, even after June the 6th, Operation Overlord, that there might be a bigger landing coming later on, perhaps in the Pas-de-Calais, is they have a rough idea how many Allied troops there are in the UK at this point. Let's say it's 2 million. It might be more than that, but I'm going to say 2 million. So the Germans think, because that's how their army military works, that if there's 2 million British, American, Canadian, Polish, blah, 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 troops in Britain, that's like 70% fighting forces. Because that's sort of how the Germans were. I'm not saying it's 70%, but it's very, very high percentage of German forces are actually in pioneer battalions, engineer, infantry, blah, 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 blah. So the Germans think, well, God, there's so many of them. What they don't realize is that there's 30 American railway battalions. They don't realize there are companies and companies and companies of road builders and all those. So their perception of the British and American forces is that it's like their army. So the Allies suffer far fewer casualties overall, but the casualties they are incurring are in the guys at the front, at the sharp end, at the point of the spear. So bomber command, fighter pilots, paratroopers, infantry, PBI, all that kind of stuff. So that's a good question. Find another couple of questions. How can I find out about a clandestine op that I haven't seen written about? A neighbor parachuted with others in Germany uniform and entered a radar station pretending to be doing an official inspect. Well. Now, Alistair, do not take any of this stuff as me insulting anybody or anything about anybody said. There are a lot of people in a lot of different nations who are telling versions of events that over the years have become exaggerated. There's an American-produced book about a British veteran that an American author met in California or something, that went into flights of fancy about he was an infantry unit and he was pressed into service as the commandos and he did this and he was one of the only survivors of this in a raid on this, and then he was thrust out of his unit at the last minute and fought at Arnhem, where he fought at Arnhem Bridge and he escaped and blah, 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 blah. It's all bollocks. Well, I don't think it's all bollocks. There's a core story of an actual guy who served in the British Army who basically just over the course of the years made lots of stuff up, okay? So with all these things, your first reaction is to be, is to use the old Occam's razor. What's Occam's razor, Woody? So Occam's razor was whatever century he was writing. Was it the 14th century? I'm being highfalutin now. Look at Woody talking about philosophers. I mean, Occam wasn't a philosopher as such, but Occam basically said that the most likely explanation of something is nearly always the correct version. So a drunken guy, you know, comes back late, knocks on the door, his wife opens the door, he's 3 hours late, he's all covered in cuts and bruises, you know, blah, blah, blah. And he tells his wife that he was kidnapped by aliens, taken to the mothership where they interrogated him, and it was them that beat him up, right? Or the more likely explanation is he got really pissed, drunk, and fell over in the ditch and had a bit of an argument with a barbed wire fence at 2 o'clock in the morning, okay? So when you hear about it's when people start saying, oh, you won't find these things written down because it was all black ops. That's the modern thing. Oh, it was black ops. You won't find it written down. I was doing all that stuff there. Most of these stories, there's some root truth to them, but a lot of them, there's embellishment. So what you have to do, basically, Alistair, is assume it isn't true to begin with, right? And don't assume it's true. Be critical. I think, well, I think this story may have been exact, and then basically apply for service records, look at dates, go down, and if you can't corroborate it, move on. I'm not saying anyone's lying. I'm just saying that these are surprisingly common. These stories. It's surprisingly the amount of times people, my friends, you know, historians, they get a photo sent, and it's a very famous photo, and then someone says, "This is my dad. This is my dad. This is my dad in Monte Cassino in 1940. That's my dad, third from the left." And the photo wasn't even taken in Italy; it was taken somewhere else. And the historians go, "No, that's not even Italy. That's a legends and family stories. It's a minefield." But what I will say is, there's very little of World War II that isn't now. That hasn't been written up. If you cannot find anything about it in any book, in any archive, be suspicious, okay? Because most things you'll find. Good question from Winchester the Thread. Another sip of beer. Yes, there are some good French books about World War II. There are some good Heimdall books in French about World War II. I've got a shelf of books in French. I can read in French. There's a book, La Brèche de Sainte-Marie de Mont, which I think I might have lent to Alex. I think Alex Churchill might be giving it back to me on Sunday. Written about the campaign of 1940 right up to 44. Never been in English. I can read French. It just takes me a long time. The problem is, I've said this before, and I've said that I've said this before. I've said this before. They don't get translated into English, and some of the best English books don't get translated into French. It's very complicated. I don't claim to explain it and understand it all, but there's a weird thing that if you as a British author want your book to be in French and you employ a translator, you don't just pay a flat fee to that translator. The translator will also then become a co-author for the French edition. So you basically have to split your money with him. It's not quite that simple, but that's kind of way of doing it. The same kind of thing works both ways. So basically, not enough books are translated. So there are some good books in French. I can't think of any absolute titles, apart from that La Brèche de Sainte-Marie de Mont. Who is the expert on the Cockleshell heroes? Robert Lyman wrote a fantastic book about the Cockleshell heroes. And there's another book by, is it Patrick Bishop? But the Robert Lyman one, I think, is my favorite on that. Let's find a couple of questions. Lance says sponsor. If you're asking whether I want to get a sponsor, Caffrey's Beer could sponsor me if it still exists. I'd love to do that. I haven't done anything about how this channel is funded on this particular Ask Me Anything. I rely on my patrons. That's how I make money. I make a little bit from YouTube, from advertising, but my main source of income for everything now is patronage. Those who sign up to be a patron, I'll have the little banner play while I'm doing it. There's the one about super thanks, and I'll put the one up about what is it? I forgot what I'm talking about now. Where is it? It's here somewhere. Come on, buddy, sort yourself out. There we are. On there. There we go. Yes. That's how I get funded. The problem about sponsors is they're a very effective way of getting in money, but then you have to do some big promo. There's channels I really like and I really like watching where you just start the subject, then the host will say, well, meanwhile, let me tell you about today's sponsor. They go into a 5-minute ramble about VPN software or nutrition bars or whatever the hell it would be. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to interrupt your viewing pleasure while I rabbit on about something that clearly I'm just doing to get a few quid, because sometimes these hosts I've watched, and this isn't World War II content, it's other content I watch, is in January they'll say, I use this service for their money, and then 3 months later they'll do a promo for a rival service, and I'm like, well, okay, so you've just taken the money, haven't you? I'm not criticizing them, because making money at this is very, very hard. So if that's the way they've chosen to make money, then and that works for you, then fine. You know, the thing is though, I don't like it. I don't like my viewing pleasure being interrupted by the host going on about something. So if Lance, your question was about why I don't have a sponsor, that's the reason. I don't want to spoil it for you. So there you are. On that subject, if you are not a patron, but you've been watching us for a long time, do consider dropping a few dollars my way every month so that it makes my life a bit easier moving forward. There we are. Said that, done it now. Right. Let's find a couple more questions, and then eventually I'll bring this in, because I've been 2 hours. I've been 2 hours doing this, for goodness sake. This is stupid. Casman, we are nearing 2 hours of Ask Me Anything. That Woody can do this for 2 hours is amazing. I don't know. It's just because I'm not. I'm on a roll. I've got that left. I'll do till that's gone. Okay. So fire me on the question, because now they've run out. Now it's either you've all buggered off somewhere else, or or you're still watching, but you're just deep in thought about some of the verbal meanderings that I've offered you today. Shepherd named a sponsor. If a beer sponsor said to me, Woody, would you have a pint of X beer every show before you do that? I would consider that. I would absolutely consider that. Anyway, so Woody is a beast. Yeah, I want KFC as a sponsor. Now, you see, here's a weird thing about KFC. It's not as good as it used to be. And it just isn't. And in France, weirdly, this is a weird thing about France. I love living in France. You can't just get proper KFC recipe chicken in France. You can get the burgers. You can't just have a 3-piece or 4-piece chicken piece. Popeyes has come to France, but there's no one anywhere near me. I like Popeyes. I had KFC in England last week. And I know it's not haute cuisine, is it? But it just wasn't as good as I remember it. And one of the reasons I have KFC, going off into kind of slightly personal stuff, is I have very, very strong memories of when KFC, or Kentucky Fried Chicken as it was back then, arrived in Colchester when I was, however old I was, a teenager. And it felt really exotic to our family. And we would go into Colchester and we'd park in the high street. And my dad would go in and get a bargain bucket or something, go back. And then we'd get back in the car, we'd drive off and park overlooking the castle park. And we'd have, when you used to get the little cleaning, lemon-smelled cleaning things. Did you have them in the States, other countries? And maybe I'm just looking about it very fondly, but my mum always brought a knife and fork with her from home. That was my mum. She'd sort of cut it up. And I have very, very vivid memories of my late mum enjoying KFC back in the day. And I suppose what I'm doing is I'm trying to find a connection to my mum. So that's why I kind of keep thinking KFC is going to kind of hit this sentimental spot. And I had Popeyes for the first time in London last year, and I really liked it. So there we are. Graham, what was the contribution of the Brewster Buffalo in the early Pacific War encounters with the Japanese? It did fairly well with the Finnish forces. Well, much better than people want to consider. And this is an interesting concept, is that when you're talking about, for example, your favorite footballers, I do think there is a skill level that modern footballers have that perhaps they didn't have some years ago. But I also think that talent is timeless, right? Some of the players I saw as a young man, you know, George Best and Johan Cruyff and Michel Platini and things like that. And then later on, you know, Zidane and Bergkamp. But with a lot of World War II tech, by definition, the late war stuff was better than the early war stuff. I mean, look at the Lancaster compared to the Wellington. Look at the P-51 Mustang with drop tanks to the P-40 Curtiss Warhawk. Look at the... So there's... When you're playing top trumps, you know, the card game where everything's based on this fighter has this speed, this tank has this type. Of course, the late war stuff trumps. That's why the card is called Trump. The card game is called Trump. Trumps the early stuff. But the point is, the earlier stuff was not necessarily completely awful in the era when it was. Some of them were not terribly good. There are some really bad aircraft and tanks and things like that. But also, like the Matilda. The Matilda tank, I think, is actually a pretty damn good. Herman Hreiðarsson. Good grief. We were talking about the only Icelandic player to play for Ipswich Town. It's the big one tomorrow. It's Ipswich Norwich tomorrow. I'm nervous already. So the Brewster Buffalo, yes, if you compare what it achieved, if you compare they were getting shot down at a worse rate than some of the later aircraft, but they were really good. Not really good. They were competent. They did all right. Okay, so there we are. And not everything late war was better. You know, yeah. Sometimes they went too down the technology route, and some things was not as good. Casway, okay, you brought up KFC and American fast food. Do you think World War II sort of shoved American foods into Europe and other places? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think it did. And it's not so much America just shoving their food in. It's as the Britain didn't have much stuff of its own, for example, in Australia. So, you know, even as a kid, for me in the 70s, I remember we had Spam a lot because my mum and dad had it when they were kids in the 50s on rationing. And it's the chocolate thing. I've probably told this story before, okay? And I'm doing a very simplified version of it, right? But maybe you'll find this interesting. I've just got to have another sip of beer. So in Britain, chocolate was heavily organized and controlled by the Ministry of Food for the simple reason they didn't want people to kind of get competitive about it. They didn't want people to kind of hoarding it. They wanted to have enough for the soldiers at the front, that kind of stuff. So you would get one type of chocolate available in one town for a particular week and they didn't want people kind of not buying that. There's a lot. I lectured on this like 30 years ago. Anyway, most UK, British chocolate brands at the beginning or the outset of World War II were dark chocolate. Bounties were only dark chocolate. Mars bars were dark chocolate. Bourneville dark chocolate far outsold Cadbury's milk chocolate. Kit Kats were dark chocolate. I could go on. What happens is that cocoa beans and the cocoa milk and stuff that was coming mostly, but not only from South America, is that particularly under Harry Truman's presidency, when he comes in because FDR dies, he is there to oversee the returning home of the GIs and the American airmen and sailors and all that kind of stuff, right? So he kind of promises them, don't worry, when you get back home, you'll have the GI Bill, but also you'll have plenty of Coca-Cola and Lucky Strikes and Hershey's. And by the way, the USA, how the hell can you eat Hershey's? It's not subjectively awful. It's objectively awful. It's got that weird, bitter, vomity, gritty. I don't know how mind you, Cadbury's is not as good as it used to be. Anyway, I digress. So, long story short, Harry Truman, as part of his thing, he's not the one signing paperwork, but fewer and fewer supplies of cocoa solids are arriving into the UK. And it started before Harry Truman actually became president. So what happens in the UK, and this does have an ending, this story, is the UK have to keep adding more and more milk to their existing cocoa solids to spread out and save the cocoa solids so they can keep on producing chocolate, because they're Tommies and Navy guys are returning home. So what happens as the war goes, I'm very much simplifying this, is they are making the chocolate milkier and milkier and milkier. So what happens is my mum was born in 1942 and my dad was born in 1945. So my dad was actually born on VJ Day, UK VJ Day, not American VJ Day. And yes, Cadbury was sold to Kraft and it's not as good anymore. So my dad grew up on milky chocolate because that's what was being produced in the late 40s and early 50s. And basically 2 or 3 generations of British people grew up solely having milky chocolate because that came out of rationing. Now, the palate of British people is changing, and the British people are gradually moving towards darker chocolate, real chocolate. I am unashamedly a child of my era, and I like milky chocolate. And when we have friends come, and it's more Mag's friends from France, one of the things they will bring is what I call posh chocolate. And I don't really like posh chocolate. I don't even like Ferrero Rocher, right? I don't like dark chocolates. I don't like them having that bitter chocolatey taste. I like milky chocolate. I like my childhood chocolate, which was milky Kit Kats and milky Mars bars and curly whirlies and all that kind of stuff. So that's why there's a direct influence, indirect influence of American policy for returning GIs affecting the chocolate I grew up eating as a kid, because my parents gave me the same chocolate they had. I think that if we're talking about the cornflakes story, Veronica, that is, if you don't know this, folks, if you don't know why cornflakes were produced, it's a really interesting story. It was to curb young men from doing an activity, not just young men, but most from doing an activity they start doing at a certain age in their teens. That's why if you like, anyway, if that's the story you're referring to, Veronica, I assume it is. So I don't know how the hell you can eat Hershey's. It really is just awful stuff. And here's the thing: if Sean Foster is watching this, so Sean Foster is a friend from North Carolina, Raleigh, North Carolina, reenactor. I've known Sean for probably 30 years now. Certainly a good 20. It's going to be 30 years. And he was a reenactor. We exchanged presents and stuff. He sent me loads of British 303 bandoliers that he got from a range in the USA, and I sent him Roman coins I got from Colchester because he collected Roman coins. That's a funny story in of itself, because he realized I lived in Colchester. He said, "You live in Colchester, don't you?" I said, "Yeah." He said, the Roman capital. Yeah. I collect Roman coins. I went, "Oh, do you?" He said, "Can you see if they've got any Roman coins in the shops near you, and maybe send me a few and I'll pay you back?" I went, "Yeah, sure." I never looked for Roman coins because my dad, when he would dig his potatoes, would dig up little tiny bits of broken Roman pottery because just from the sewage pipe, because it's a Roman town. Roman shit is everywhere. So, long story short, I'm going off on a tangent. I went to some antique shop I knew. And I said, "You got any Roman coins?" Well, yeah, we don't have much call for them around here because you got Roman museums everywhere. So I bought a big old handful of them. It cost me a couple of quid or something. Nothing like, not gold pieces, just like bits of chipped and cast and stuff. And, I don't even know what they were, whatever. But Roman coins, legitimately Roman coins. And I shoved them in a bag, a jiffy bag, and I sent them to the USA. And I said, you can pay me at some point. When he opened the bag, he shit himself because he thought it was like hundreds of dollars worth. And he was like, "Oh God, I can't possibly afford to pay you back for them." I said, "It cost me like $5." It's supply and demand, isn't it? In North Carolina, there aren't that many Roman coins popping up in yard sales, right? In Colchester, shitloads of them, right? So he said, I said, "No, it cost me about $5. So you don't even owe me anything at all. Just send me something." And I said, "Hang on." I said, "Can you get me any Civil War bullets, US Civil War bullets? Because they're expensive in the UK." He said, "Well, there's shit tons of them around here." It's, again, supply and demand, isn't it? So he sent me some Civil War bullets to repay me back for the Roman coins I sent him. So if Sean Foster's watching this is the point I'm getting to about Hershey's, is at some point when I first knew him, he must have given me a Hershey bar or something, and I politely, because I'm British, I said, "Oh, that's nice." Because we never complain in restaurants, do we, us Brits? Mag will, if she doesn't like the food, she'll tell the waiter. Or I don't. Oh, I did once because Mag told me to. Once last year or the year before, restaurant at Judo Beach, the fish and chips were just so absolutely awful, honking it was. I couldn't eat it anyway. So my friend Sean falsely believed I like Hershey's. So every year for Christmas, he sent me increasingly large blocks of Hershey's. It got to the point where the bars, he would say, were like the size of a dining room table. And I, yes, Willie, quite nice. Yeah, Hershey's is, I would probably say, yeah, it's quite nice, meaning it's not very nice at all. But he heard, it's quite nice. Oh, Woody likes Hershey's. That's clearly what happened, Willie. You've hit the nail on the head. So I let this slide for a few years. I would get this stuff and I would give it away to people. In fact, I used to cut it up and I used to put it in the waxed D-ration chocolate bars and give it to reenactors to eat on events because I couldn't stomach the stuff. And like, 2 decades passed, he'd raised children who'd left home. And finally I said to Sean, I don't fucking like Hershey's. It took me so long to admit it. And he doesn't send me anymore because probably I offended him. No, it's just that I could probably get Hershey's in Europe now, but why the hell? In fact, they do sell Hershey's in Europe. Why would you want that? Anyway, whatever. I'm going to leave it there in a minute because I really now haven't finished my beer and I can hear Chaos, the kitten, trying to scratch it in and she's hungry now. Give me one more question. Come on, give me a question. One serious one, because I've been talking about chocolate and Hershey's and stupid stuff. And you can tell that I've loosened up slightly because I've had a couple of beers. There's no more questions coming. You obviously don't want to have any questions. What is interesting about the chocolate in World War II is the tropical Hershey's bar that was issued to American troops, where they basically they increased they changed the melting temperature so it didn't melt so easily. Because obviously, if you take chocolate bars into the bloody jungle, they're going to melt into liquid very quickly. So they increased the melting temperature, which means it's awful. It's because you can't, when you put it in your mouth, it doesn't go anywhere. It just stays there. It doesn't, and that's one of the reasons Cadbury's melts at human body temperature. That's why, it used to before Kraft bought it. So apparently it melts. It's that sweet spot when you put it in. It just starts melting down. Favorite World War II animal story has got to be the mules. The incredible importance of mules as transport in World War II. I mean, people would say pigeons, and pigeons are incredibly important for communications, but mules for me. Gregory, why did US Air Force abandon bomber escort after World War II? I have no idea. Why that is. Have I tried World War II K rations? Yes, I have. I've eaten World War II ration. Genuinely, we opened up a tin of biscuits that had been sealed in 1945 about 20 years ago and had them, and they were all right. I mean, they were hardtack. They were the kind of biscuits that, again, they're not meant to be. They're not pleasant to taste, but they would have do it. What am I looking forward to this year? I think I want Ipswich to get promoted to the Premier League again. We'll see. Got 6 games to go? 5 games to go. We'll see how it goes. I'd like that to happen. I'd like to spend some quality time with my dad, which I haven't necessarily been able to do. What's my favorite outdoor hat? I've got 2 or 3 that I rotate for outdoor. I haven't worn this one outside now for a couple of years. It's actually falling apart. The lining has got holes in it now. I've worn it so often, but it's just the hat I do this in, and so I have other hats, but I don't wear them for streaming. I have worn a different hat for streaming occasionally, but no, I like, this is my lucky streaming hat. Collins Bench, let's leave it on that, bro. I saw that there a second ago. Where was the message there? Oh, I can't find it now. Was that Brian put it there a second ago? Can't bloody find it. Yeah, I just saw your comment there, Brian. Now I can't bloody find it now. It's because I had a couple of beers. That's why. Where the hell is it? It was there a second ago. Anyway, Brian Yee asked me about Colin's bench. So Colin Taylor, my best mate, died in September. Miss him like I can't explain. I've been a bit of a recluse this winter. I mean, this has been great. But I just haven't been in the right mood for going and doing stuff. And that's so this year. So in fact, I'm answering the question about what am I doing this year. So this year, and I said this earlier on about the content this year, because I do what I do at this time of day, it's evenings, right? I'm streaming from, so it's 8 o'clock, it's 10 o'clock now, 20 past 10. I can't be at the pub and be here at the same time. So what would be happening over the last few years is that I occasionally, more often than occasionally, someone I know would say, I'm in Bayeux on Wednesday. Can I meet you? I go, I can meet you before, but I've got a stream. Sorry. And maybe I'd go and have a quick drink with them, or I'd say I'd meet them in the day. This year, I'm absolutely making sure that I take advantage of seeing people. And if a historian's in town, I will do the show. That's why I moved Wednesday's show earlier. Because Gareth was over from Wales. No, Gareth was Saturday. Gary was over from Northern Ireland on Wednesday. And a couple of beers with him. So that's why. So this year, I'm putting me first, which I haven't necessarily always done. So if something comes up and a historian's in town, or there's something I want to go and do, I'll just postpone the show, do it earlier, do it the next day, do something. So so Colin Taylor, my best friend, yeah, Gareth, yeah, we had beers, didn't we? I didn't get as drunk with you as I did with Gary. Gary's you're much more restrained, because I know you were going to be anyway. I got fucked up on Wednesday with Gary. Anyway, so Colin Taylor, my mate, we're gonna do a bench to him at some point. It's still so raw. It's so hard to talk about. It's so just hard to just even have the subject up. I'm gonna do a tribute show to Colin at some point. Now, I did the tribute show to Tim Cook, but as much as I completely respected Tim Cook, he wasn't a close friend. I knew him a bit. We'd been on the channel, we chatted a bit, but I was able to conduct myself with the appropriate dignity and a bit, functioning host thing. And if you watch the show with Tim Cook, Mike Bechtold was in a pretty, emotional state doing it. Understandably, they were very close. Okay, so with Colin, I couldn't do one. I would not be able to do it. But anyway, Brian, to answer your question, we were going to be putting a memorial bench to him somewhere, possibly in Crepon, near where the monument to Green Howards is, to him as a tour guide. We originally had tickets to go and see The Damned tomorrow in London and Wembley, and we didn't end up happening. I didn't want to do it, and no. It's no problem bringing it up, Brian. You've met Colin. You knew what a utter cockwomble he was at times, but I love him to bits. I loved him to bits, and I miss him hugely. And so getting fucked up in terms of I got drunk. I got a bit wibbly wobbly. I got bungalowed, another English term. I got completely bungalowed last night. It was Wednesday. So this year I'm putting myself a bit first. So I saw Gary on Wednesday. I saw Gareth on Saturday. I'm seeing Alex Churchill and Stephen Fisher on Sunday, and I may join them for lunch. They're over on a tour sometime next week as well. And I'm just going to do that. If people are over, I want to talk to, go to the pub, go to have a coffee, whatever, and talk war crap. There we are. But I'm going to leave it there because I really do need to go and evacuate my bladder. So there you go. It's Michael McIntyre says you can literally use any word to describe being, just pick any word. I was absolutely, ring-binded last night. I'm looking at things around me. I was absolutely, post-it noted last night, meaning you were drunk. So there we are. So if anyone's over in Normandy this year. I'm meeting up with another historian who's written a book about an officer in the intelligence corps. Meeting up with him in a few days' time, and then he's coming over with the widow of this guy he's written about, who's in intelligence corps. So I'm meeting up with him in June as well. Dennis is saying, I would show up for that bench dedication. Only met Colin a couple of times, but he made a great and powerful impression. Yeah, he was a really cool person, and also an utter knob. He could be a very difficult person, as I can, and I miss him hugely. Right, there we are. I was ding-bobbled last night. Right, I'm going to go now. I finished my beer. I will see you all again on Tuesday, it looks like. I kept proposing the date of Monday to various guests, and no one bit. Couldn't get anyone for Monday. So Tuesday, we're talking about SOE agent. Lots of stuff coming up. Lots of things coming up. But as always, if you're not a patron but would like to consider becoming a patron, please consider doing that, or YouTube channel membership, or at the very least, just subscribe and watch. There we are. I will see you all next time. This is Paul Woodadge for WW2 TV saying enjoy the rest of your Friday and enjoy your weekend. I will do my best to enjoy mine. Cheers. Bye.